everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
Danmachi, Shinigami, Chapter 151 to 168. Chapter 151. Phobos 1166 words. After being pestered by Ares for a while, Marius finally dragged him away just before Rayleigh's patience ran out. After all, tonight's banquet had not been held for the sake of a musician, even if that musician was strangely captivating. However, although Rayleigh had managed to shake off Ares, he was immediately surrounded by other gods and nobles. That made him think, this is bad. I accidentally drew too much attention. He should have quietly finished performing, faded into the background, and then approached Phobos. Instead, he had become one of the main focal points of the entire venue. Just as he was troubled by this, Eleonora descended. Her arrival caused the surrounding people to scatter, as though avoiding a plague. Rayleigh was finally liberated. Once the two of them gradually lowered their presence, Rayleigh, led by Eleonora, came to the side of the goddess Phobos, who was standing alone. Princess Aisha, and the impressive musician. Seeing Eleonora come to find her, Phobos seemed somewhat surprised. The girl corrected her, my apologies, Lady Goddess. I have already discarded that name. I'm sorry, Eleonora. Phobos's expression was very gentle. She gave off the impression of someone kind and understanding. So, what business do the two of you have with me? Phobos asked, going straight to the point. Until now, she had not displayed any particular charm in public, nor did she have any connection with the princess, so she was certain there had to be a reason behind this. Rayleigh spoke at this moment. The truth is, Lady Goddess, while I am a musician, I am also skilled in painting. That really is impressive. But my painting has reached a bottleneck. I cannot advance any further, and that troubles me greatly. It is like standing one step away from the summit of a mountain, yet no matter what I do, I cannot see the view from the peak. Rayleigh spun nonsense with remarkable emotion, then he directly stated his request. I wish to paint something that does not exist in the lower world. In other words, a god. More precisely, a goddess. A beautiful goddess. Thank you for the compliment. I am merely stating a fact. That is why I wish to paint you, Lady Goddess. Please grant me permission. You want to paint me? Phobos rested one hand against her cheek. Her beautiful eyes curved gently, making her look very charming. A long time ago, she had indeed had followers who built statues for her. Although she had been quite moved by the gesture, the appearance of those statues had honestly been difficult for her to accept. There were even some people who, because she was the patron goddess of Leo, had directly carved her into a lion-headed human body. This was the first time anyone had asked her to act as a model for a portrait. However, she had additional concerns, so she did not dare accept his offer. Thus she answered, I'm sorry, but I think I should refuse. Hearing her say that, Rayleigh was not surprised. Instead, he said, what I wish to paint is precisely your current state, Lady Goddess. Sorrow, hesitation, anticipation, those complex emotions are exactly what I want to express. What are you talking about? Phobos's expression suddenly became unnatural. I only hope you can trust in my ability, Lady Goddess. Phobos looked at the human boy before her, still hesitant in her heart. There was something she wanted to ask, but she could not ask it in this place. If someone overheard them, everything would be over. Very well. Phobos accepted Rayleigh's request. On the way back, however, Phobos immediately began to regret it. Why had she agreed to a stranger's request? Clearly, this was not the right time to invite complications. The distress letter she had sent to Orario had yet to receive any response. Did they not intend to help her? Inside the carriage, Phobos revealed an exhausted expression. She was close to being unable to hide things any longer. The Kratzo family was even more obsessed with restoring their former glory than she had imagined. A person capable of forging Kratzo magic swords had appeared once again among the Kratzo bloodline, Welf Kratzo. The Kratzo family had asked her to report this matter to Ares, but because of Welf himself, she had chosen to conceal it. Being able to forge magic swords was not a blessing for that child. It was a burden. Welf did not want to forge magic swords, he even despised them. If Ares obtained someone like him, Welf would undoubtedly be used for military purposes. He would become nothing more than a tool for creating magic swords. A worried expression doesn't suit you, Lady Phobos. Inside the carriage, where Phobos should have been alone, a man's voice suddenly sounded. Phobos's expression changed drastically. Then she saw the air before her twist, as though a sheet of cloth had been lifted away. After the distortion faded, the one who appeared there was the young musician from the banquet hall. A crisp snap of Rayleigh's fingers rang out. A barrier instantly covered the carriage, preventing any sound from passing outside. Please remain calm, Lady Phobos. Allow me to introduce myself properly. I am Rayleigh of Hephaestus Familia. Rayleigh changed his appearance back to its original form. White hair and eyes as deep as an abyss were a rarity almost never seen in Rakia. His words, after leaving Phobos briefly stunned, immediately filled her with joy. Hephaestus. She had sent a child of her familia to Rakia, he had come to help her. Rayleigh, you came from Orario. That's right. In other words, Orario accepted my request. The guild accepted it, but the request was not made public. It was privately entrusted to us, Hephaestus Familia. Also, this time, I came alone. As he spoke, Rayleigh suddenly remembered Lullian's existence, so he corrected himself. Just me, and one member of Hermes Familia. The smile on Phobos's face instantly became forced. After a few seconds, she could no longer maintain it, it turned into anxiety. You came to Rakia Kingdom with only 2 people. That's far too dangerous. Hearing her say that, Rayleigh looked into those Leo-shaped pupils while also sensing the goddess's Ryuraku, confirming that her words came directly from the heart. Rather than complaining, she first worried about the dependent of her friend. No wonder this goddess could become friends with his own patron goddess, she was a kind goddess unlike Ishtar. I can't say there is no danger, but please leave this to me. Rayleigh showed a confident smile. The only situation he truly worried about was having information leaked, and ending up surrounded by Rakia Kingdom's army. With his current strength, he still could not face the military power of Rakia Kingdom, all by himself, especially not while protecting hostages. He had to prioritize their safety when considering how to act. Chapter 152, Chapter 152, Charming 1346 words, Rayleigh, thank you so much. And Hephaestus too. To be honest, I'm almost unable to keep the Kratzo family under control anymore. They're already planning to bypass me and report Welf's existence directly to Ares. Even as a goddess, Phobos looked exhausted. Her eyes seemed to have dimmed considerably. Worry filled her voice as she said, once Ares learns that Kratzo magic swords have returned to the world, he will definitely use them for war immediately, causing even more conflict and chaos in the lower world. That child. Welf resists forging magic swords. Putting Ares aside for the moment, the others will not allow him to waste such precious talent. In the end, they may even come up with inhumane methods to threaten him. As she spoke, imagining such a scene, Phobos clasped her hands tightly together. In that moment, she looked less like a goddess and more like a helpless woman. And in truth, that was exactly what she was. Having lost her familia, she had even lost the reverence people once held for her. As long as Ares did not use his divine power, no matter how absurd or unreasonable his actions were, they would still be considered acceptable in this kingdom. Even Orario could not completely restrict the thoughts and actions of gods. Just like when Apollo Familia attacked Hestia Familia, in order to force Belcranel to join them even though people had been seriously injured, as long as no one died, the guild's handling of the matter would not have any substantial effect. Nor could they forcibly suppress it. Even Ganesha Familia could only maintain order. They could not violently stop Apollo Familia, because Apollo Familia was not part of Evolus. It was like the difference between a civil matter and a criminal matter. Pollo Familia had understood that boundary very well. And outside Rio, there was not even a management organization like the guild. That was why Ares' authority had swollen to such an extent. Although Ares was a musclehead, if he truly obtained Kratzo magic swords, it would become an extremely terrifying situation. Outside the city, including Rakia Kingdom, very few people could reach the level of upper-class adventurers. Among Rakia Kingdom's 100,000 soldiers, those who had reached level 2 or above could be counted on one hand. The main reason was that the outside world did not have the dungeon. The monsters born from the dungeon possessed strength far beyond that of surface monsters. On the surface, threats comparable to middle-floor monsters were rare. Even the appearance of a single minotaur would cause a commotion and require the deployment of a knight order, or even an army, to deal with. In such an environment, gaining the excelia and great feats necessary to level up was extremely slow. That was why Rio was the center of the world. Because of the existence of the dungeon, the gods, and the guild, all of them together formed the Labyrinth City, attracting countless adventurers who sought fame and glory. For that same reason, the city also restricted high-level adventurers, preventing them from leaving, so as to stop the outflow of elite combat power. I understand the situation. In that case, we should leave as soon as possible. But Ares keeps very strict watch over us subordinate gods. Leaving probably won't be that easy. Right, how did you get in here? Rayleigh looked at the startled goddess and thought that although this goddess looked fairly intelligent, her reaction speed was unexpectedly slow. She was only wondering about that now. Just then, the carriage jolted slightly. In that instant, Rayleigh witnessed something that left him utterly stunned. That sway. That amplitude. That aftershock. It made no sound, yet through the sheer process of movement alone, it allowed one's eyes to experience an indescribable sense of weight and softness. He took back what he had said earlier. This was not the body type of an intelligent person. At the very least, with that much capacity, it had to be taking up a lot of CPU and memory. The result was that her brain occasionally displayed symptoms of natural airheadedness. Rayleigh held his breath, suppressed the cold gasp he had nearly drawn in, and slowly exhaled, hiding the shock he felt inside. Judging purely by visible scale, even in Rio, where goddesses gathered in abundance, perhaps only the goddess of the harvest, Demeter, could put up a fight against her. I used magic that can conceal my form. Invisibility magic. No wonder. There were clearly so many people outside, yet this boy had managed to enter the carriage. Even Phobos, who had been sitting inside the carriage, had not noticed that someone was right in front of her. If he had that kind of ability, then perhaps they really could escape. Phobos suddenly gained a little confidence in Rayleigh. The carriage soon arrived at Phobos's residence. She stepped down from the carriage. A young man who looked to be around 20 years old was standing there, as though he had been waiting for a long time. The moment he saw Phobos, his face lit up with joy and he walked forward. Welcome back, Lady Goddess. Ah, thank you for waiting here especially for me, Clyston. Not at all. I simply wanted to see you as soon as possible after being separated from you for half a day, Lady Goddess. Phobos's smile became somewhat strained. Her gaze occasionally shifted behind her, as though she wanted to confirm something. As for the young man in front of her, his name was Clyston. He was a member of Ares Familia, a level 2. He served as a squadron commander in Rakia Kingdom's Knight Order, with the authority to command 150 knights and 600 soldiers. Ares had entrusted him with an important duty. Namely, monitoring the subordinate gods. Clyston was young and full of ambition. The first time he saw Phobos, his heart had been captured by her beauty, a beauty that did not belong to the lower world. From that moment onward, he had always longed to receive the favor of a goddess like the heroes in ancient tales, to experience a world-shaking romance between human and god. More importantly, he wanted the goddess to become infatuated with him. He wanted her to be so enchanted by him that she lost herself completely. In stories, the heroine would often give everything she had for the protagonist, no matter the cost. He hoped that he, too, could be treated that way. What Clyston did not know was that Phobos had long since seen through the intent in his gaze, which could not have been any more obvious. And in daily life, Phobos did everything she could to avoid being alone with him. Although she did not think he had the courage to truly offend a god, as long as she shared the same space with him, Phobos felt uncomfortable all over. She tried not to look at this unpleasant man, and walked directly toward her residence. It was a noble's mansion. Though whose mansion it had originally been, she did not know. Now, its purpose was to serve as Phobos's cage. Because the movements of subordinate gods had to be followed by watchers whenever they went out, Phobos spent most of her time alone in her room, avoiding Clyston as much as possible and rarely coming out. She returned to her room, closed the door, sat down by the bed, and after letting out a sigh, fell backward. Her long golden hair spread across the bed, looking even finer than the silk sheets beneath her. She pressed the back of her hand against her forehead, and narrowed her eyes slightly. After her long eyelashes trembled twice, her breathing gradually evened out, and before long, she had fallen asleep. Seeing how exhausted she was, Rayleigh covered her with a thin blanket before temporarily taking his leave. Read 30 chapters ahead and support me on Patreon. com/Nobaya Translator. Chapter 153, Chapter 153, I Want to Go Home. 1312 words after leaving Phobos's residence, Rayleigh used Ryatsu to search for Lulyan's location and arrived in front of a certain building. Ordinary objects usually could not block Ryatsu, so he went straight to one of the walls. Lulyan was on the other side. He placed one hand against the wall, and voices from inside reached his ears. The first voice belonged to the Beastman girl, and there was anger in her tone. This isn't what we agreed on. I already paid in advance to use your passage, and now you're raising the price at the last second. Don't you think that's against the rules? Amun snorted disdainfully. Price changes are normal. You can choose not to use it, but we won't refund the money. You call doubling the price normal? Hee, that's right. Let me say this first. Right now, ours is the only route you can use. Lulyan stared at the men in front of her, so angry that she gritted her teeth. If possible, she would have preferred to simply pay more and settle the matter quietly, than use their hidden passage without causing trouble. But she did not have enough money on hand, and moving funds around would take time. The problem was whether anything would happen during that time. Thinking of the rumors about her current partner, she felt afraid. The only man in Oraria with the nickname Thousand-Man Slayer. Even the infamous Arachnia might not necessarily have killed that many people. This isn't the first time we've worked together. Let me take the person out first, and I'll send the money later. How about it? Lulyan's eyes widened in fury. But the man suddenly asked, Hey, you're from Orario, aren't you? A flash of panic crossed Lulyan's face. And that did not escape the man's eyes. So he immediately continued, There's no use playing dumb. Don't think our previous deals left no traces behind. Sir Knight, it's her. She's the spy sent by Orario. With this I can make up for my mistake, right? The man suddenly spoke in a fawning tone to another person in the room. A knight. Emer, you bastard. Have you lost your mind? Lulyan cried out in shock. This guy was involved in treasonous business himself. And he actually dared to report her to a knight. What kind of joke was that? It wasn't as if there was some deep grudge between them that required mutual destruction, so did he really have to go this far? The Beastman girl looked at the 4 men in front of her. One of them was a kingdom knight. In other words, he was at least an upper-class adventurer. Although she was also level 2, she was a complete novice when it came to combat. She would not be a match for a knight who had trained in swordsmanship since childhood. Worse, she was outnumbered. This room did not even have a window. There was nowhere to run. You've done well. You caught one of Orario's insects. Rest assured, as long as you still have value and continue helping me find these pests, I can overlook your crimes, the Kingdom Knight said to the criminals. Yes, Sir Knight. Although Emer was smiling, his heart was burning with rage. That bastard knight. After catching their tail, he had not arrested them. Instead, he forced them to keep doing this, turning them into tools he could use to make money and earn achievements. Originally, they had wanted to kill him off, but the bastard was unexpectedly vicious. He had captured their families and thrown them into prison. They could not even get close to a place like that, let alone rescue anyone. With hostages used against them, they could only obey. He really could not tell who the villain was anymore. There was no such thing as good people or bad people. That kind of thing did not matter at all. They were simply too weak. And the weak could only be exploited. The knight drew his sword and spoke to the three criminals, "You three, grab her for me. Otherwise, I'll cut you down." The three men approached Lullian from different directions. One of them held a hemp rope and handed both ends to his companions on either side, then began tightening the encirclement. Damn it. Should I use it? Lullian looked at the tattoo on the back of her hand. This was the communication magic used to call Yodasai. And then there was. She reached toward the pouch fastened above her hips. Inside were self-defense tools Asfi had given her. If used properly, they could restrain even a level 5 for an instant. At the very least, it would take 6 or 7 seconds to break free. As for these opponents, they probably would not be able to move for an hour or two. Just as she was hesitating over what to do, boom. The wall suddenly exploded. The bricks that flew out scattered at incredible speed, sending the three approaching men flying backward at once. The bricks that did not hit anyone embedded themselves directly into the inner walls, blasting several holes straight through them. Lullian stared blankly at the scene that had unfolded without warning, her face full of confusion. She looked toward the place where the wall had blown open. A large hole had appeared there, wide enough for 2 or 3 people to pass through side by side. Then a person stepped through the opening. "Monst, it's you." Rayleigh glanced at the beastman girl, then looked at the men lying on the ground and groaning. "Sorry for the interruption." He walked into the room. There he saw the Kingdom Knight staring at him as though facing a mortal enemy. Rayleigh raised one finger toward him. "Hado number 1, show." The knight felt as though a sledgehammer had smashed straight into his face. Stars burst across his vision, and he immediately collapsed. "How weak." Rayleigh shook his head, then turned back to the stunned Chianthrope. "I've already met Lady Phobos. There are people watching her, so getting her away without fighting or being noticed will be difficult. As for your situation here, I more or less heard it from outside. In short, if we kill all these guys, the hidden passage belongs to us, right?" A chill ran down Lullian's spine. "Kill all of them? He's too terrifying." Probably. Then I'll target all 17 aura signatures in this facility." It became 14. Realizing something, Rayleigh looked at the 3 people lying on the ground. In just a few breaths, they had stopped groaning and fallen into eternal silence. Using Ryuraku to distinguish the identities behind those Ryatsu signatures, Rayleigh confirmed that there were no innocent people among them. Then he touched the floor with one finger. At that moment, 6 points of light appeared around the exterior of the building. The 6 lights connected, forming a barrier. The instant the barrier took shape, the hearts of the 14 criminals stopped at the same time, and they collapsed to the ground as one. Their eyes were wide open, filled with confusion. The sensation of suffocation gradually swallowed them, robbing them of all feeling within a minute as their consciousness sank completely. "All right. Take over this place next, I'll bring this guy with me." Rayleigh casually hoisted the unconscious knight over his shoulder and said that to Lullian. The beastman girl swallowed hard. Her hearing was extremely sharp. So the sounds of bodies falling that she had just heard from the next room were because all those people had been killed. This is too terrifying. Lord Hermes, I want to go home. Working together with someone this frightening really made her live in constant fear. Chapter 154, Chapter 154, Sarn. 1380 words carrying the knight over one shoulder, Rayleigh borrowed the interrogation room here for a moment. He tossed the man onto a chair, then slapped him twice without the slightest politeness, violently rebooting him. The knight's face flushed red from the blows. He opened his eyes, saw Rayleigh, and in less than 2 seconds remembered what had happened before he had been knocked unconscious. He immediately tried to reach for his sword. "Looking for this?" Rayleigh asked, holding up the knight's sword. When the knight saw his own sword in the enemy's hand, he froze. The fact that he had been taken down without any ability to resist had already made the difference in strength clear, so he did not fight back. That made Rayleigh raise an eyebrow. Looks like Ares Familia isn't entirely made up of idiots. The knight was angry, but he did not dare show it. He simply stared at Rayleigh in silence, waiting for him to state his purpose. "Brelandon. Do you know about Princess Eleanor Aisha?" "Her Highness." Although Sarn did not resist, he kept observing Rayleigh. He was not some useless fool. On the contrary, he had talent and had undergone strict training. He was a promising rising star in Ares Familia. Even in this situation, he wanted to pretend to obey and use that chance to extract information about the enemy and his objective. But no matter how he thought about it, he never expected the princess's name to be mentioned here. Through Sarn, Rayleigh learned more about Eleonora, including her background and experiences. Because her mother had died young, her mother's former patron goddess had become like a foster mother to her. But that mother figure had also been sent back to heaven by Ares. Before being sent back, she preserved Eleonora's ability values and set her fauna in a state where conversion could be performed at any time. Because of that, the skill she had hidden was exposed. And Ares had set his eyes on it. This was practically another wealth. Fate was truly strange. To think Rakia Kingdom had produced both Eleonora and wealth at the same time. If Ares truly gained control over both of them, a great war would inevitably break out in the future. The Kratzo family was a bloodline despised by elves. That was because Kratzo magic swords had once burned the elves' homeland, reducing their forests to scorched earth. They could unleash firepower in an instant comparable to great magic with an ultra-long chant, making them even more terrifying than elves, who were naturally gifted in magic. If Ares obtained Kratzo magic swords, after a period of preparation, he would almost certainly attack the elves. Add in the many heroic talents born from Eleonora as a breeding vessel, and the danger would be even greater. The Kratzo family was practically the elves' natural enemy. In the worst-case scenario, the elves would be defeated, losing their homeland and even their freedom. Ares would conscript and enslave them, turning them into Rakia's military force. With the power of the elves, plus Kratzo magic swords, Ares would most likely turn his eyes to the dwarves and Amazons next. And once the demi-human races on the surface had all been conquered by him, neither the Empire nor the great magical nations would be able to stop him anymore. In the end, he might even gather the power of the entire world and launch an attack on Orario. This chain of imagination might sound alarmist, but it was not impossible fantasy. "Are you a suitor of Her Highness?" Rayleigh shook his head. "Strictly speaking, we've only met twice. We helped each other with a few small favors." "Small favors? Don't tell me that night." Halfway through speaking, Sarn suddenly realized he had said the wrong thing, and hurriedly shut his mouth. That night? Rayleigh instantly thought of the day Eleonora had been kidnapped. The Great Cathedral. A place like that, with knights guarding it, had been invaded by 3 men who had even successfully kidnapped the princess. No matter how one looked at it, that was far too absurd. At the time, Rayleigh had not been interested, so he had not investigated the matter deeply. But now it seemed that must have been a plan carefully arranged in advance. The person who hired those 3 men was also your employer. Having stumbled upon an unexpected clue, Rayleigh asked out of curiosity. Sarn remained silent. Seeing that, Rayleigh had no intention of forcing a confession. He simply drew the knight's sword. The moment Sarn saw him draw the blade, he panicked. "Wait, I'll tell you." Before he could finish, Rayleigh had already swung the sword down and killed him. He was not that interested anyway. Casually tossing away the blood-stained sword, the boy murmured, "In the end, I don't really care that much." Whether it was Sarn or Emer's group, none of these people deserved sympathy. Killing them did not place even the slightest burden on Rayleigh's conscience. It was no different from killing the scum of Evolus. When he walked out, he saw Lillian waiting for him with a troubled expression. "What's wrong?" "You'll understand once you follow me." The Beastman girl complained, "Aya, I'm so unlucky." After all that effort, the guy who built this hidden passage was seriously annoying. Rayleigh followed the irritated girl underground. The so-called hidden passage turned out to be an underground route that stretched from beneath this building all the way outside the city. But after walking only a short distance, a wall appeared in front of them. The girl pointed at the wall in frustration and said, "This is what I mean. The path is blocked." The Beastman girl kicked it, and it did not budge at all. "It's insanely solid." Lillian spread her hands helplessly, showing that she had no solution. Rayleigh raised his hand and knocked on the wall. Forget an echo, even the sound of knocking against it was absorbed. That proved this wall was extremely thick. "I searched everywhere and couldn't find the mechanism." The Beastman girl scratched her ears and cheeks in distress. After thinking briefly, Rayleigh placed his palm against the wall and said, "Move back a little." Lillian froze. The next second, Rayleigh directly loosened his upper garment, letting it hang around his waist. The Ryatsu bursting from his body immediately snapped the girl back to full awareness. "This guy. Don't tell me he's planning to break the mechanism." Rayleigh closed his eyes and gathered the Ryatsu within his body. Then he rearranged the Reisher. Hirenkyaku. Lightning-like spiritual energy erupted. At the same time, he activated Blood Artillery, the opposite of Blood Vene, an ability that greatly increased attack power when striking. He combined 1-inch force with sword pressure. Before obtaining Jif Blessing, Minor, this might have required a long period of research, but now, even though the idea had come to him on the spot, several different powers merged together as naturally as water flowing downhill. It would work. In the vacuum space less than 0.01 millimeters between his palm and the wall, he completed an instant acceleration. From Rayleigh's palm, a terrifying impact enhanced by multiple layers of power was released. Shagreen smoke rose from Rayleigh's palm. His other hand gripped the wrist of the hand he had used to attack. Lillian clutched her ears, completely stunned. After Rayleigh pulled his hand back, she leaned forward and stuck her head into the wall. The reason she could do that was because Rayleigh's attack had not destroyed the entire wall. Instead, it had opened a circular hole in it. The edge of the hole was so neat that it looked like the result of industrial cutting. The part that had been struck had been directly vaporized, without leaving even the slightest fragment behind. After measuring it, Lillian discovered that the wall was more than 1.3 meters thick. Hey. Was this for real? The person who built this thing was already insane enough, but being able to do this barehanded was even more ridiculous. Hephaestus Familia's Yodasai really was one terrifying monster. Read 30 chapters ahead and support me on Patreon. com/Nobaya-Translator Chapter 155, Chapter 155, Welf Kratzo 1278 words. When Rayleigh returned to Phobos's residence, he discovered that the goddess had already woken up and left her room. Through Ryaraku, he observed that she was currently speaking with several highly agitated people. By touching those spirit ribbons, he could also hear the contents of their conversation. He had to admit, ever since coming to Rakia Kingdom, his eavesdropping skills had grown increasingly refined. Now doing all of this felt almost natural. "Lady Phobos, how long do you intend to make us wait? The revival of our family is clearly right before our eyes. The opportunity is already here. Why are you still delaying? The goddess looked at the excited men in front of her, then glanced at the little boy sitting at the end of the table with an ugly expression. Welf Kratzo. Phobos sighed inwardly and could only say, I am not deliberately delaying anything. You should care more about Welf's feelings. He is not ready yet, the Mun, who was the head of the Kratzo family, roared and cut off the goddess's words. Even though it was disrespectful. After all, the Kratzo family had never truly respected this goddess, a loser in their eyes. Welf is my son. He isn't that weak. For the revival of the Kratzo family. The Mun excitedly took out an object wrapped in cloth. He untied the cloth. What appeared inside was a crimson short sword. Phobos's expression changed. That's right. The Mun held the sword in both hands, raised it high, and laughed wildly. A Kratzo magic sword. As long as we show this to the father of the nation, he will surely accept our family once more. We will reclaim everything we once possessed as nobles of the forge. Phobos instinctively spoke up to stop him. But that only provoked the Mun further. So you really are deliberately obstructing our family. I will report this to the father of the nation. You wretched goddess, you truly cannot be trusted. I understand now. You intend to keep Kratzo's power for yourself so you can take revenge on the war god, don't you? Our family is loyal only to His Majesty Ares. Listening in up to this point, the corner of Rayleigh's eye twitched slightly. The Kratzo family were nobles of the kingdom, weren't they? Shouldn't they be loyal to the king? Why were they calling Ares His Majesty instead? Finally, someone could no longer endure it. The deranged man turned his head and looked at his son. That's right. The one who shouted was not the goddess. It was Welf Kratzo. The red-haired boy clutched his chest and shouted, Are magic swords really that important? Grandfather, didn't you say that the most important thing about a weapon is that it stays by its wielder's side? Didn't you say that even if we couldn't forge magic swords, we should rely on our technique to create weapons stronger than magic swords? Magic swords don't only abandon their masters. They abandoned our family too, didn't they? Welf swore with all his heart, I promise, I'll definitely forge weapons even greater than magic swords. So before Welf could finish speaking, his father's slap had already fallen. The heavy blow knocked Welf off balance and cut off his impassioned declaration. Stunned from the slap, Welf touched the area under his nose and found that blood was flowing out. Phobos stood up, wanting to step forward and help the boy up. But the moment she rose, an old man blocked her way. Lady Goddess, forgive me, but please stop bewitching Welf. From now on, please don't meet with him again. After saying that, the old man turned back, grabbed Welf by the arm, and prepared to drag him away regardless of his resistance. At the same time, the other members of the Kratzo family all stood, intending to leave with them. Phobos grew anxious. This was bad. The Kratzo family had already fallen into madness. Obsessed with past glory and the achievements of their ancestors, they had forgotten the true pride of nobles of the forge. She had to stop the Kratzo family from leaving. But at that moment Clyston, who had been watching everything from the side, blocked her path. Lady Goddess. Clyston. Move aside. I'm sorry, but I can't do that. Phobos became increasingly anxious. She could see the wariness Clyston held toward her. This man was a member of Ares Familia. In a sense, calling him her enemy would not be an exaggeration. The situation has already begun to spiral out of control. It seems it would be better to leave before things enter the next stage, wouldn't you agree, Lady Goddess? Rayleigh's voice suddenly rang out. Clyston and Phobos reacted in completely different ways. A trace of relief finally appeared on the goddess's face. You're back. I happened to witness the entire thing. Then I don't need to explain, do I? Don't worry. Rayleigh ignored Clyston and began speaking with the goddess as though no one else were present. Their attitude immediately enraged the Mun. Who are you? Clyston drew his sword. The Kratzo family, whose path had been blocked, also barked angrily, whoever you are, get out of the way. Lord Kratzo, please calm yourself. Leave this person to me. Clyston did not run. Instead, he walked toward Rayleigh step by step, as though trying to increase the pressure brought by his own presence. Seeing his posturing, Rayleigh blinked. Then he released his Ryatsu onto the men all at once. In that instant, Clyston learned what pressure truly meant. An invisible sense of oppression seeped into every cell of his body, making him feel as though he had been completely exposed before an enormous threat. That pressure made his body impossibly heavy. Clyston dropped to both knees. Sweat poured down his body like rain. His eyes widened to their limit. His breathing grew more and more rapid, while the air inside his body failed to keep up with what he needed. Symptoms of suffocation began to appear. Suddenly, Clyston stopped moving. He no longer struggled. His breathing completely ceased, and his pupils began to lose focus. What did you do? Seeing this incomprehensible scene, the members of the Kratzo family could only question him in fear. Rayleigh casually replied, I merely let him understand the difference in strength. In the face of head Captain Yamamoto's Ryatsu, Nanao had not even been able to breathe, and had even been taught the lesson, I don't have time to teach you how to breathe. When Ryatsu grew strong enough, even the air would solidify because of it. It became like being underwater, unable to draw breath, only able to exhale the air inside one's body without taking any in. And if the Ryatsu reached the level of someone like Aizen, it could crush people outright, or even break down weak existences into atoms. Bakudo number 62, Hyaparankan. Rayleigh casually threw out more than a dozen blue rods of light. The light rods pierced through the bodies of the Kratzo family members, binding them in place and leaving them unable to move. The rods were so fast that they had no time to react at all. Only Welf was deliberately left untouched. Welf stared in shock at everything happening before his eyes, completely unsure how to respond. I'll make a new original Zanpakuto that have a power over Dream, and the wielder is Cassandra. What do you think? Do you have an idea of original Zanpakuto and their future wielder? Share it here. Chapter 156, Chapter 156, Pride of Smith 1271 words, what did you do? Seeing his clansmen, his father, and his grandfather pierced through by the blue bars of light, Welf was badly frightened. Like a stray cat with its fur standing on end, he bared his teeth at Rayleigh. Rayleigh ignored him. He simply looked at the goddess Phobos. The goddess nodded, then stepped forward, grabbed Welf by the shoulder, and explained, Welf, this person is a member of Hephaestus' familia, the familia of my friend in Orario. He accepted my request and came here to rescue us. Rescue us? Welf froze. And Hephaestus? Wasn't that the legendary goddess of the forge? As long as someone was a smith, there was no way they would not yearn for that goddess. That goddess is willing to help us. If that was true, then it was wonderful. Rayleigh said, don't worry. I didn't injure them. This magic causes pain, but it won't create wounds or make them bleed. After hearing his explanation, Welf looked toward his family and found that they indeed were not bleeding. Their expressions were only somewhat twisted in pain. The old man glared fiercely at Welf and at Phobos and Rayleigh as well. So it was thieves from Orario. Wretched goddess, are you trying to help Orario steal away the hope of our Kratzo family? Welf shouted, this is my decision. It has nothing to do with Lady Phobos. Grandfather, you said it yourself, didn't you? A weapon is a warrior's life. A magic sword is fated to break, which means it abandons its owner on its own. Even if we lost the power to forge magic swords, you said we could still create the finest weapons. Welf clenched his fists so tightly that his whole body trembled. You said that was the pride and glory of a smith. I admired that version of you more than anyone. But that was just my own wishful thinking. After you found out I could forge magic swords, you changed. You threw away the craft of smithing, and filled your head with nothing but Kratzo magic swords. The pride of a smith. What a load of crap. You know, all of you were the ones who trampled the pride of smiths beneath your own feet, until it was worth nothing. In his agitation, Welf's nails dug into his palms, and blood flowed from between his fingers. Shallow fool. Compared to Kratzo magic swords, every other weapon is worthless. The old man did not listen at all to Welf's heartfelt words. He only roared at the boy. Rayleigh frowned, even Sauconade at his waist trembled with him. He gently stroked the hilt. Then he said, "How pitiful." "Who are you calling pitiful?" "Stop spouting nonsense, you brat. You know nothing of how great Kratzo magic swords truly are." The corners of Rayleigh's mouth lifted slightly. The pity in his eyes as he looked at the old man was completely undisguised. A frog at the bottom of a well knew nothing of the vast sky, let alone the universe beyond it. True, Kratzo magic swords were powerful. According to legend, a fire magic sword could evaporate the sea with a single strike. But in the end, they merely borrowed the power of a spirit. Before the gods descended to the lower world, spirits were the main force and reliance that humans and demi-humans had used to resist monsters. Spirits, under the guidance of the gods, aided the lives on the surface. They were the avatars of the gods. But compared to the power of Zanka no Tachi, which could destroy the world, even a spirit itself could only be afraid. All right, no more wasting time. Let's leave quickly. As Rayleigh spoke, he prepared to take the goddess and Welf away. But just then, a burst of laughter suddenly rang out. It was Welf's grandfather. At that moment he laughed smugly and said, "Do you really think you can escape?" Seeing how certain of victory he looked, Rayleigh asked, "What do you mean?" The old man's eyes shone with malice. He did not bother hiding anything and spoke directly, "Did you think I wouldn't guard against that goddess? Before coming in here, I already sent someone to inform Lord Ares. Counting the time, that lord should already be." Phobos's expression sank. Welf instantly broke out in cold sweat as well. He was afraid. Afraid that he would be captured. He looked toward the goddess beside him, only to discover that there was no fear in her eyes, only worry. The goddess lowered her head and looked at Welf. When their gazes met, Welf suddenly understood. From beginning to end, Lady Phobos had been thinking of him. Beyond that, even if she herself was placed in danger, she did not care. In that instant, Welf felt the goddess's affection with extraordinary clarity. Rayleigh no longer paid any attention to the old man, as he released his Ryuraka senses. Then he discovered that quite a few people had indeed arrived outside. By a rough estimate, there were likely more than 400 warriors with fauna. That is quite the grand lineup. Rayleigh muttered. But it was easy to understand. Ares was the father of Rakia Kingdom, its most important figure. Following Ares meant power and status. But if one thought about it from the opposite direction, it was also the people with excellent skills who had gathered around him. Both sides depended on each other and could not afford to lose the other. That was why Ares's movements were always heavily protected. After all, once Ares was sent back to heaven, all of them would instantly become fish on the chopping block. Everything they currently possessed would vanish like smoke. "Lady Goddess, can you ride a horse?" "No, I can't." Rayleigh vanished from where he stood. Not long after, a carriage came racing over. He stood atop the carriage and brought it skidding to a stop in front of the two of them. Phobos lifted Welf up and sent him into the carriage, then climbed in herself. Rayleigh flicked the reins and the carriage shot forward as though launched from a spring. At that moment, in front of the mansion gates, Ares was happily preparing to enter the estate. He had wanted Kratzo magic swords for a long time, but the Kratzo family had disappointed him again and again. He had never expected a new hope to be born now. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Clatter, clatter, clatter. Lord Ares. A knight reacted quickly and rushed forward, pushing Ares aside. He himself was knocked flying by the carriage. Watching the carriage speed away, the members of Ares' Familia at the gate stood stunned for several seconds. "Hey, are you all right?" Ares hurried to the knight who had been struck by the carriage and checked his injuries, only to find that the man was coughing blood and could no longer speak. Ares flew into a rage. "To think they dared hurt my warrior! Send out our forces and stop that carriage!" The war god roared out his order. Nearly 100 people immediately sprang into action. One after another, they began gathering their subordinates and launching the pursuit. "Yoa-aya!" Welf screamed non-stop, frightened by the carriage's wild speed. For a child his age, that was unavoidable. Although he would grow into a loyal, dependable man one day, right now he was still only a little brat. The carriage rampaged through the streets. Before long, it charged into the upper district and began rushing straight toward the middle district. Chapter 157, Chapter 157, Running Away. 1337 words. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The carriage axle spun at high speed, grinding against the road with a thunderous roar. Mixed with the hoofbeats of the two fine horses, the noise drew the attention of countless pedestrians before the carriage even turned into the next street. People all looked toward the upper end of the road. They were waiting for whatever was making that sound to appear. Two fine horses burst out. The carriage they were pulling nearly turned 90 degrees in an instant. With a sharp drift, the carriage was yanked straight again and shot down the middle of the street at frightening speed. "Get out of the way!" The people on the street scrambled madly to both sides. After the carriage thundered past, they all stared in the direction it had vanished, unable to pull their attention back for a long time. It was only when a cavalry unit chased after it along the same route that the crowd immediately began discussing and guessing what exactly had happened. A carriage's speed was still far inferior to that of war horses. Before long, Rayleigh and the others were caught up too. Seeing this, he jumped straight down from the carriage. While still suspended in midair, he kicked one of the knights off his horse. Standing on the horse's back, Rayleigh discovered that the warhorse had suddenly stopped, and was even trying to throw him off. He was surprised by how well trained these horses were. Then he leapt down from the horse's back, wrapped his fist in Ryuryoku, and sent the warhorse flying with a single punch, smashing it through the wooden door of a nearby shop. More knights charged in. Rayleigh raised his thumb, index finger, and middle finger, then swept them across in front of his eyes. Bakudo number 37, Tsuruboshi. A hammock woven from spiritual power spread across the street, turning into a dense, elastic curtain that blocked the knight's path. They lowered their bodies and tightened their legs around their horses, intending to smash straight through the obstruction. However, the moment they struck it, they realized that this barrier possessed shockingly powerful elasticity. 7 or 8 warhorses and their riders were launched backward by the force of their own charge, flying a considerable distance. The cries of the horses rang out one after another. Mixed among them were the screams of the knights as they crashed to the ground. "Despicable bastard, stop using petty tricks like this." After discovering Tsuruboshi's elasticity, several knights drew their swords and chopped down at the barrier before them. This thing. Their blades fell as they landed on Tsuruboshi. However, the elastic barrier did not fear sharp blades as they had expected. Not only was it not cut apart, the sensation that came through their weapons was strangely wrong. How is that possible? Before the soldier could even complain properly, an astonishing rebound force traveled back through his weapon and into his wrist, directly sending the sword flying out of his hand. The weapon spun 2.5 times in midair before stabbing directly into another knight's foot. After standing frozen for about 2 seconds, the knight who had been stabbed while standing still finally cried out in pain. I didn't mean to. Damn it, what the hell is this thing? Swords can't cut it, and the rebound is ridiculous." The embarrassing display from his subordinates made their commander feel thoroughly humiliated. "All of you, move aside." A warrior who seemed extremely confident in his own strength stepped forward. Judging by his outfit, he appeared to be a general. With one swing of his blade, the barrier that had left the knights helpless was immediately torn open. In the end, it was only Bakudo number 37. Expecting it to endure attacks from someone on the level of a level 3 was asking too much. The man followed with several more slashes, completely destroying the barrier. Even so, his expression remained ugly. Because in his mind, he had expected to destroy the obstacle with a single strike. Instead, it had taken him 6 cuts. Every extra slash made him feel as if the gazes around him had gained another layer of contempt. Continue the pursuit. Latest order, capture Lady Phobos and Welf Krotso inside that carriage at all costs. As for the man, kill him if necessary. Do not let them escape. Rayleigh returned to the carriage and drove it into the middle district. The farther outward one went, the larger the city districts became. The sheer size of the middle district, combined with its complicated terrain, greatly slowed their speed. A streak of red light shot into the sky. A crimson fireball exploded overhead, instantly putting the entire city into wartime alert. The city gates, which had originally been conducting inspections, all stopped their work at once. The gates were immediately dropped, sealing every exit. The people on the streets all went pale. They fled toward their homes in a panic. Some, for safety's sake, rushed straight into nearby shops and slammed the doors shut. In less than 3 minutes, not a single ordinary resident remained on the streets. The road had become open, but Rayleigh was not happy about it. Instead, he grew even more solemn as he remained alert toward his surroundings. Through sensing Ryuraku, he could feel more and more soldiers appearing around them. I'll be taking this achievement. On a rooftop beside the street, a man holding a bow drew the string fully back. The arrow knocked against the bow was aimed at Rayleigh on the carriage. But 1 second before the arrow could be released, Rayleigh suddenly raised his head and met the man's eyes. The archer was startled. He noticed me. He had clearly been hiding. Was it some kind of enemy detection skill? But with the arrow already knocked, he had no choice but to fire. The man released his fingers. The arrow spun through the air, flying straight toward Rayleigh's upper body. Rayleigh swung his blade and sword slash rushed toward the rooftop. The arrow in flight was instantly crushed into powder by the force. The upward surging pressure carved a fresh slash in the roof. Although it did not hit the archer directly, it still caused him to fall into the crack. So strong. Welf muttered, stunned by Rayleigh's strength after seeing that scene. But then, another group of people suddenly rushed out ahead of the carriage. In the blink of an eye, they set up a barricade. If the carriage crashed into it directly, it would undoubtedly be smashed to pieces. At the same time, pursuers appeared behind them as well. Over 100 knights rode warhorses, all fully armed. Enemies appeared on the rooftops too. And this time, there was not only one of them but an entire group. Archers, crossbowmen, mages, and other rear-line fighters had gathered there. Every one of them was already preparing their attack. We're going to crash. Welf screamed and clung desperately to the carriage, not daring to let go. Rayleigh stretched his palm forward. Disappear. The lightning cannon fired by Hado number 63 erupted. Under the horrified gazes of those blocking the road, the barricade and the people around it were all vaporized. It sounded like real thunder from nature. After the lightning evaporated the enemies, it scattered in twisted blades of electricity in every direction, leaving several deep scars across the ground. And without a chant. This time, not only Welf and Phobos were stunned. Even the members of Ares Familia were shocked. Shoot the horses. The archers all aimed at the 2 fine horses connected to the carriage. Rayleigh frowned slightly. He reacted swiftly, immediately raising his hand toward the sky. Hado number 58, 10 ran. A massive tornado stirred up every incoming arrow, twisting them out of formation before blowing them back. More than a dozen people were injured by the rebounding arrows. Chapter 158, Chapter 158, Massacre 1311 words. Hey, take the reins and drive the carriage toward the place I tell you. There were more and more enemies now. Rayleigh could no longer keep intercepting them from atop the carriage, so he grabbed Wealth and dragged him to the driver's seat. After saying that, he did not care whether Wealth could actually manage it or not. He jumped straight off the carriage. In the span of 2 breaths, Rayleigh was surrounded by more than a dozen men. Facing a spear encirclement formation, he lowered his body, swept his arm over his head, and slashed upward with his razor-sharp blade. Every spear shaft was cut apart. Then he turned his slash into a horizontal sweep, the blade cutting across several men's waists and slicing 5 of them cleanly in half. He picked up one of the spears, gripping the end of it one-handed with his left hand, and swung it around with ease. Every enemy within 2 meters of him was forced back by his monstrous strength. Several of them raised their weapons to block, only to be smashed flying backward, coughing blood as they went. This guy, he's absurdly good at fighting. He's from Ora Rio. He's very likely a high-level adventurer. Attack together. Don't give him a chance to breathe. In the middle of the fierce battle, Rayleigh suddenly raised his palm toward the sky. The people around him were startled by the movement, thinking he was about to use magic again. But after 2 or 3 seconds, nothing happened. They decided Rayleigh was only bluffing and continued their assault. His blade came down. Another man was split in 2 from the shoulder. Watching a living, breathing comrade turn into 2 bloody chunks of meat right before their eyes had an enormous impact on Ares Familia's side. The younger members, who had never seen such a gory scene before, began to lose their nerve. Rayleigh's gaze cooled. If they had been juniors on his own side, he would not have minded giving them guidance. But right now they were enemies. And this place was a battlefield. It was a pity. But he would not hold back. Nor could he let an enemy's opening pass. He stabbed his sword into the ground to fix it in place, then gripped the spear with both hands and spun the 2-meter-long weapon, switching his grip between them as it whirled. His terrifying strength stirred up a violent storm. Those blown away by the wind pressure were still considered lucky. The ones struck directly by the spear spinning at high speed had parts of their bodies torn away and blown apart in an instant. After clearing the enemies around him, Rayleigh reversed his grip on the spear and took a throwing stance. Ryoryoka poured into the spear. The spear turned into a beam of light, piercing through the street, blasting away everything in its path, then slamming directly into the center of the night formation farther back. It was like a missile had exploded. A gigantic ball of light bloomed on the ground, and a mushroom cloud rose into the sky. Rayleigh did not bother checking the results. He immediately swung his blade and deflected the projectiles flying toward him. After knocking away several arrows in succession, Rayleigh suddenly noticed that a metal ball had been mixed into the incoming attacks. It was a clever move. His blade was thin, and not suited to taking such a heavy blow on its side. If he used the flat of the blade to block it directly, there was a high chance the blade would crack, or even be smashed apart outright. Of course, that was assuming. It was an ordinary sword. Facing the incoming iron ball, Rayleigh slashed directly. The sword slash cut the iron ball apart and swept toward the rooftop at the same time. Impossible. The man who had fired the iron ball was almost scared out of his wits when he saw it get sliced apart from a distance. When the sword slash swept toward him, his legs went weak, and by sheer coincidence, he avoided the killing blow. His hair, however, was not so lucky. The aftermath of the sword pressure swept across it, and carved his hair into a kappa-like style. In other words, a bald spot right down the middle. The man's pants grew wet. He had pissed himself in terror. Heido number 31, Shikaho. 30-fold volley. Clusters of flame gathered around Rayleigh. The fire condensed into crimson orbs, then, under Rayleigh's control, all of them flew toward the rooftops at once. Incantation Abandonment. A single Kido spell copied 30 times. Dense fireballs appeared behind the running Rayleigh and circled him. Then, at his command, they shot out one after another, drawing long trails of flame through the air. The sheer intensity of the firepower dyed the sky over a large area red. The moment the fireballs fell, a chain of explosions swept across the rooftops on both sides of the street. The roaring flames rose like fire falling from the heavens. Several subordinate familias under Ares Familia suffered heavy losses in an instant. Those who collapsed to the ground cried out for help one after another. Seeing the enemy fall into chaos, Rayleigh did not continue fighting. He turned and chased after the carriage. He knew very well that a small victory like this meant nothing. As long as they were still inside this royal capital, the battle would never truly end. There were only two conditions for victory. First, escape this place. Second, annihilate Rakia Kingdom. The second victory condition meant he would have to kill roughly 100,000 enemies. If he chose that option, his stamina and mind would be the first things unable to hold out. That was why Rayleigh would not let himself get dragged into a prolonged fight. His thinking remained clear. While chasing after the carriage, he fought several faster enemies who had managed to close in. After cutting down several more men, Rayleigh's breathing was still steady. It had not even quickened. A scout from Ares Familia watched Rayleigh's performance from a vantage point, cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. Unbelievable. To think someone could fight this ferociously even under a large-scale siege. Were all adventurers from Rio this inhumanly strong? After comparing him to known figures, the scout could not match the boy in front of him with any famous adventurer. First of all, among high-level adventurers, it was already rare to see humans. Most were elves or beast men. Looking at the composition of Freya Familia and Loki Familia's top combat forces made that easy to understand. Loki Familia's 3 executives were an elf, a dwarf, and a palom. Freya Familia was the same. Their strongest fighter, Otter, was a beastman. Next was the goddess's chariot, Alan, also a beastman. The black elf magic swordsman and the white elf magic staff were both elves. Humans had average potential and short lifespans, which made it much harder for them to produce high-level adventurers. Special cases like Zald and Althea were always the minority. Among the names Rakia had listed as requiring the greatest caution, there were only a handful of humans. Fire the magic. Brilliant magical light filled heaven and earth. More than 100 mages chanted in unison, their combined magical energy sending tremors through the air itself. Spells of every element and color fired out. Their target was Rayleigh. Against magical bombardment like this, forget level 3, even a level 4 adventurer could not expect to survive. However, Rayleigh had no intention of dodging. Bakudo number 81, Danku. An invisible barrier rose in front of Rayleigh, and the storm of fireballs, ice blades, and stone spikes all crashed against the shield of Danku. Read 30 chapters ahead and support me on Patreon. com/Nobaya Translator. Chapter 159, Chapter 159, Fushabai 1403 words, there's no effect. All of our attacks exploded in midair. It's like they were stopped by an invisible wall. Are you stupid? Even a city wall would have been blown apart under that much firepower. Can't you tell this is the enemy's defensive magic? The mage who had been scolded turned back and looked at the barrier, whose height was dozens of meters at the very least, while its width seemed to stretch beyond sight. Because it was invisible to the naked eye, he could only estimate the size of that wall. What kind of joke was that? You called that defensive magic? That strength? That range? How could magic like that possibly exist? An arrow was deflected away. The one who had fired it was a member of King Marius's personal guard. Physical attacks don't work either. A defense like this can't last forever. Everyone, prepare to charge the instant that barrier disappears. Hearing the sounds of attack gradually stop, Rayleigh knew that the enemy had already figured it out. Although Danku was Bakudo number 81, its defensive power could completely block all Hado below number 89. In Rakia Kingdom, there were no mages powerful enough to compare. Rather than wasting strength trying to break Danku, it was better to conserve their energy and wait for the barrier to disappear on its own. After all, maintaining a Keto spell at the level of number 81 for an extended period, was not something even a captain-class Shinigami's Ryatsu could endure for long. At the very least, one would need more than 10 times that amount of Ryatsu to manage it. While Rayleigh was thinking about his next move, he suddenly sensed presences approaching at high speed. What was this? There were 6 Ryatsu signatures on it and... He stopped abruptly. The instant he halted, a building ahead of him was smashed apart, and a carriage radiating golden light burst through the smoke, blocking his path. Rayleigh looked at the carriage before him. He found it rather surprising. See, Marius. Look at how this formidable enemy reacted. I told you spending a fortune to buy this chariot from the great magical nation was the right decision. Ares's laughter seemed to carry some strange power, stirring up a gust of wind that blew away the dust and smoke. Marius gripped the carriage's handrail tightly, his expression ugly. His dignity had taken a serious blow. 5 aggressive-looking knights jumped down from the carriage. Rayleigh's gaze narrowed slightly as he swept his eyes over each of them. Ares planted one foot on the chariot frame, folded his arms across his chest, and asked. Adventurer of Ora Rio, will you submit to me? I refuse. What a shame. Ares had no intention of wasting words. The moment he heard Rayleigh's answer, he directly signaled his familia to attack. The 5 knights moved at once. 2 of them were the largest, both more than 2 meters tall. But despite their size, their movements were sharp and efficient. In an instant, they appeared on either side of Rayleigh, spreading their arms to cut off his retreat. Then came 2 light warriors attacking from the front. All of them were fully armed, but their equipment had clearly been carefully designed. Not only was it powerful, it also did not interfere with their fighting styles. It was completely different from mass-produced knight armor. They all wore helmets, so Rayleigh could not see their faces, but he could see the sharpness in their eyes. The person in the rear had a much smaller build. She held an elegant silver bow, both ends decorated with the crest of Rakia Kingdom. 2 vanguards, 2 midguards, and 1 rearguard. Rayleigh lowered his head and took a step back. In an instant, he vanished from the foreman encirclement and placed all of them within the range of his slash. He turned the hilt of his sword sideways, gripping it with his right hand. It was an Iajutsu stance he had learned from Kagaya. The moment their target disappeared, all 4 widened their eyes in shock. The midguards had a wider field of view, and immediately discovered Rayleigh's new position. They shouted a warning at once. Behind you. The 2 small giants immediately turned around. But their vision was already filled with sword pressure. At the same time Rayleigh drew his blade, he released compressed sword slash, shaping it into a crescent slash that flew toward all 4 of them. They could not dodge. The moment they saw that slash, they made the judgment. The 2 vanguards clamped their arms together. Their thick arms pressed side by side, like 3 layers of solid wall. Each of them planted 1 foot behind them as support. The crescent slash struck their defense and forced them back 6 or 7 meters. So strong. The 2 looked down at the cuts on their arms. This was the first time they had ever blocked an attack together and still been wounded. Just then, a chant began to ring out. Rayleigh's gaze passed over the 4 people in front of him, and landed on the female archer in the rear. At that moment, she had her hands clasped together. That rearguard was not an archer. She was a healer who could also use a bow. The moment they noticed Rayleigh's gaze lock onto their healing unit, the 2 midguards immediately shifted their positions, guarding against the high-speed movement he had displayed earlier. Beautiful. Ares praised Rayleigh's earlier strike highly. Marius merely sighed. There was truly nothing he could do about Ares. This god was far too good at causing trouble. The 2 small giants charged once more. This time, Rayleigh did not retreat. He stood where he was, took a step forward, and swung his Zanpakuto hard. But that massive body suddenly dropped toward the ground. Both hands shot up. Astonishingly, he pushed against Rayleigh's arm. The instant they made contact, the small giant locked his 10 fingers together, trying to grab Rayleigh just like that. But Rayleigh stomped one foot onto his face, interrupting his attempt. Rayleigh was somewhat surprised. The man looked bulky and honest on the outside, but in reality, he was flexible and sly. A little like Omida. Using that huge head as a springboard, Rayleigh flipped through the air and retreated 5 meters. Before the tip of his foot touched the ground, the other tank suddenly accelerated. The terrifying burst of speed made his enormous body blur, and he arrived in front of Rayleigh in an instant. Seeing the enemy suddenly close in, Rayleigh noticed the magic gathered in his hand. This guy was a magic tank. No chant too. No, wrong. It was an ultra-short chant. This felt somewhat troublesome. The enemy had accurately caught the timing of his evasion, and deliberately attacked while he had nowhere to borrow force. This guy was also completely different from how he looked since he was very precise. Unfortunately, the corners of Rayleigh's mouth lifted slightly. That smile fell into the two men's eyes, making them move even faster. Regrettably, in the next second, Rayleigh disappeared. Just like when they had launched their surprise attack earlier, it was teleportation, whose movement process could not be captured at all. He clearly had not touched the ground yet. The magic tank's attack could no longer be stopped. His hand slammed down toward the ground. That strike directly imprinted a circular crater into the street. And it was not over. The circular pit continued to collapse further. It looked like a shockwave that ignored defense and pierced through the surface of the body, and it was a multi-hit attack at that. Rayleigh's figure bypassed the two of them and rushed straight toward the two mid-guards. For a Shinigami who could manipulate Raysure to create footholds, the entire three-dimensional space was no different from flat ground. The two vanguards quickly turned back to give chase. But the moment they lifted their feet, they discovered that red lines of flame had bound them to the ground, forcing their legs to remain tangled with the street beneath them. Heido number 12, Fushabai. It was a small trick Rayleigh had released instantly through incantation abandonment, when he brushed past the two of them, binding them in place and preventing them from pursuing him. Chapter 160, cornered 1270 for words. Damn it, what is this thing? My feet are stuck. Rayleigh charged toward the two mid-guards. As he ran, he loosened his outer coat, revealing a black vest and the solid muscles beneath. A surging wave of Ryatsu burst outward. Lightning like Ryoryoku crackled from his body. His fist, wrapped in Ryatsu, punched through the air itself. Rayleigh's Shuinpa was too fast for the two to react. Both of them took a punch to the chest and were sent flying. After knocking them away, Rayleigh felt a faint sting on his cheek. He wiped it with his finger. There was no blood. In his Shunko state, his entire body was wrapped in highly condensed Ryatsu. The fact that his opponent had managed to counterattack on instinct was already impressive, but it still wasn't enough. The slash had only left a white mark on his face. Now it's your turn. Rayleigh stepped forward and walked toward the rearguard. He raised his foot. In the next instant, he was already right in front of her. The rearguard, who was actually a healer, was startled, but after bending her knees slightly, she did not retreat. Instead, she instantly drew the dagger at her waist and stabbed repeatedly toward Rayleigh's temple, ribs, and chest. To Rayleigh, her speed was far too slow. He merely lifted his hands lightly and blocked every one of her attacks. When she spun around and thrust toward his other temple, Rayleigh pierced straight through her wrist with his finger, forcing the dagger from her hand. Then he swept a kick across her lower body. She was knocked to the ground immediately. Heido of. Just as Rayleigh was about to finish off the healer, his vision suddenly swayed. He felt as if he were about to fall, so he quickly spread his feet apart to steady himself. What's going on? There was a fluctuation of mind. Rayleigh supported himself with his Zanpakuto and raised his head toward Marius, who stood beside Ares. At that moment, Marius was holding something and pointing it in this direction. That's a magic item. Was that something else they had bought from the great magical nation? A curse? No, it didn't quite feel like one. An illusion. His senses had been disrupted. Rayleigh shook his head, trying to clear away some of the dizziness, but before he could fully recover, the two vanguards broke free from their restraints. The ground itself was torn upward by their strength. The two rushed behind Rayleigh. One of them smashed a fist into Rayleigh's back, driving him into the ground. The other leapt high into the air. Then he dropped like a meteor. After that, he hammered both fists down at Rayleigh again and again. His storm of punches shook the earth non-stop. The two Midgards had also climbed back to their feet. Seeing Rayleigh being pounded into the ground beneath those enormous fists, they all believed the battle had ended here. That guy is finished. Bang, 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 bang. After dozens of full-powered blows, the giant finally stopped and stood there panting heavily. He had exhausted his strength and attacked with everything he had. Fragments of stone slid off the giant's fist, fell to the ground, and bounced several times. Are you done? Rayleigh's calm voice suddenly sounded. The giant was startled. How was that possible? He looked down. There was Rayleigh, lying in the crater that had been smashed into the ground, right in the center of it. Aside from his clothes being a little dirty, there were no visible injuries on him at all. His attacks had done nothing. Rayleigh lay expressionlessly in the sunken ground, his posture relaxed. Blue patterns flickered across his body from time to time. Against this kind of opponent, there was no way they could break through the defensive power of a body reinforced by blood veneer. Rayleigh's cold voice rang out. The giant froze. In the next instant, a cold flash of steel swept past. The giant's shoulder swayed slightly. Then he realized he could no longer feel his left arm. A moment later, blood sprayed. It would be more accurate to say it gushed out like a fountain. A massive amount of blood surged from the giant's severed arm, making him let out a miserable scream. He grabbed the wound with all his strength, clamping down hard to forcibly stop the bleeding. Because of the intense pain, he dropped to his knees on the spot. At that exact moment, Rayleigh also stood up from the crater and stood before the giant. Rayleigh was over 1.80 meters. Originally, he had been much shorter than the giant, but now, he was the one looking down at him. The giant seemed to want to say something. But in the next second, those words were trapped forever in his throat. Because his head had already separated from his neck. Rayleigh remained in the posture of having just swung his sword, unmoving, as the giant's head slowly slid from his neck. The huge head fell to the ground, and all the blood stored within it spilled out. The battlefield fell silent for several seconds. You bastard! Seeing their comrade killed, the remaining four finally recovered from their shock and roared in fury. Rayleigh was not afraid of them. He was only wary of the magic item in Marius's hand. That sensory disruption tool was troublesome. Although its performance was nothing special, nowhere near Sakane's level, being affected by something like that in the middle of battle could be fatal. He prepared to use Shuinpa and kill all of them in one burst of speed before they could react. But before that could happen, a huge number of enemies appeared from every direction. The main road, narrow alleys, sewers, rooftops, figures emerged from everywhere, above and below, flooding the area like a tide. It's over. Winning through numbers may be disgraceful, but you were reckless enough to charge into the enemy's headquarters. Surely you were already prepared for this. Rayleigh glanced at the enemies present. After sensing them, he found more than 3,000 Ryuraku reactions. The Kratso family had also caught up. The old man widened his eyes, and looked toward Rayleigh in the center of the battlefield. Even surrounded, Rayleigh continued waiting. He did not use Sakane's Bankai. Because with Ares present, he did not want to use Sakanade. If Sakane's power could even alter a god's perception, the consequences would be beyond what he could bear. Surrender, warrior of Orario. You have nowhere left to run. To make this much trouble in Rakia Kingdom is already impressive, but this is the end. Rayleigh sensed the presence drawing closer. His face remained expressionless, and in his heart, he counted silently. 500, 450. 300, 200. Suddenly, his eyes opened, light flashing within them. He raised his hand once again. Unlike before, when nothing had happened, this time a shadow flew from the far end of the sky, crossing the distance in an instant and landing in Rayleigh's hand. When the people around him saw it clearly, they realized Rayleigh now held another sword in his grasp. Holding that sword, Rayleigh's gaze pierced through the enemy formation and landed on the old man. You said no weapon can compare to a Kratso magic sword, didn't you? Then open your eyes and watch carefully. Let me show you what the strongest sword truly is. Bankai. Read 30 chapters ahead and support me on Patreon. com/Nobaya Translator Chapter 161. Chapter 161. Hayatan Hayakaso 12:15 words. Rayleigh's eyes turned a brilliant ice blue, and his whitened hair stirred without wind under the force of his overwhelming Ryatsu. A vast pressure poured out of him and covered the battlefield. In an instant, nearly 1,000 people were crushed beneath that pressure, unable to remain standing as they collapsed one after another. Some were forced flat against the ground. Others dropped to their knees, drenched in sweat. A deadly panic began spreading through the crowd. Rayleigh drew the blade from its sheath, and an astonishing chill radiated from the snow-bright edge. Cold air swept outward, instantly coating the ground in a layer of frost. At the same time, a pair of dragon wings and a dragon tail rapidly formed behind Rayleigh. His limbs were covered in ice crystals as well, transforming into dragon claws. 3 cross-shaped ice flowers hovered behind his head. Daiguren Hyarinmaru. Seeing his transformation, Ares showed a look of curiosity. Marius, however, covered his mouth and nose with one arm to avoid breathing in the freezing air. Because he was standing the closest, tiny ice crystals had even formed on his eyelashes, white mist appeared with every breath. That same thought surfaced in the minds of many people at once. They rubbed their frost-reddened skin, teeth chattering as they looked at the one responsible for all of this. Their hearts were shaken beyond words. Welf's grandfather had heard Rayleigh's words. Naturally, he connected this bone-piercing cold to the sword in Rayleigh's hand. But that was not enough. In terms of destructive power, Kratso magic swords were still more. Just as the old man was about to reach that conclusion, Rayleigh suddenly beat the pair of wings behind him. In the blink of an eye, he arrived in the sky above the royal capital. Seeing him actually fly, the members of Ares Familia below were left staring in disbelief. He's flying. Unbelievable. Those wings are clearly made of ice. How can they carry someone into the sky? And how is he that fast? Because the sight was too shocking, even with the truth right in front of them, they could not stop questioning it. Rayleigh raised Hyarinmaru in his hand and pointed it toward the sky. This Hyarinmaru is the strongest ice and snow type Zanpakuto, he murmured. Its power can even command the weather. His voice carried clearly to the ground and it entered everyone's ears. Zanpakuto. Hyarinmaru. Strongest ice and snow type. All of those were unfamiliar words to them. Even so, they could understand what command the weather meant. Welf's grandfather stared wide-eyed, his throat dry. He desperately wanted to shout, "That's impossible." But what was happening in the sky left him speechless. Suddenly, the ground was swallowed by shadow. The sky, which had been clear and sunny moments ago, was now covered in rolling storm clouds and the temperature plunged. Tenso Jurin. This was Hyarinmaru's fundamental ability. Just as its name implied, it could alter the weather according to the wielder's will, bringing everything in the sky under its control. It was also one of Hyarinmaru's most powerful abilities. Even Hitsugaya Toshiro, after training to the level of a captain, could not use this power with complete ease. And after actually using it himself, Rayleigh understood why. A layer of white spread across the sky. When that whiteness descended and fell onto the people below, they finally realized in shock what it truly was. Marius reached out and caught one of the falling white specks. His eyes widened. He instantly lifted his face and looked at the figure in the sky. He did this. He really can control the weather. Welf's grandfather stared up at the sky as snowflakes landed on his aged face, cooling even the fire burning in his heart. How is this possible? How can a sword change the weather? Something like this. How could this happen? Zanpakuto. He seemed to have heard of that before. Someone who had fled from Oria once claimed that a smith from Hephaestus Familia in the Labyrinth City had created swords with souls, and those swords possessed special powers. They could control flames, release waves, and even summon giants. Because the contents had sounded far too absurd, he, an old smith with 80 years of experience, had never taken it seriously. But now, he was personally witnessing a sword he had believed could not possibly exist. I don't believe it. How could I possibly believe this? This isn't real. Damn it, shoot him down. We can't. He's flying too high. Neither arrows nor magic can reach him up there. Rayleigh stood in the air, looking down over the royal capital. If he were alone, he could simply leave gracefully like this. But below him, 3 people were still waiting and Bankai could not be kept active forever. Rayleigh gathered enough Ryatsu and gripped Hyarinmaru with both hands. This was the true meaning of sit upon the frozen heavens. He would use this to bid farewell to Rakia Kingdom. Hayaten Hayakaso. The storm clouds churned as a white tide slid down from above the clouds. Like an avalanche. A white waterfall poured from the heavens, yet it did not fall with the force to crush everything beneath it. Instead, after descending a certain distance, it scattered into the air. Marius looked up at the pure white flakes drifting down from the sky. A snowflake landed on his fingertip. In the next instant, an ice flower suddenly bloomed from that fingertip, sealing his finger inside. Marius's eyes widened, and his expression changed sharply. He felt a bone-deep chill invade his flesh and blood through that finger, freezing all the way down to the bone. Marius immediately drew the sword at his waist and struck the ice flower with the hilt. After 2 blows, it had only cracked slightly. But he could no longer feel his finger. Marius anxiously used all his strength to smash it. After 7 or 8 strikes, he finally shattered the ice flower. Along with it, half of his finger broke apart as well. His mangled finger seemed to have already died from the freezing temperature. Marius looked directly at his own injury, yet felt nothing. Then he suddenly realized something. With fear written all over his face, he looked toward the heavy snow covering the entire city. It's like the dead of winter. The rearguard healer saw the terrible state of Marius's finger and immediately panicked. Your Majesty, please allow me to heal you. The woman covered entirely in armor stepped forward and began using healing magic, helping Marius restore the finger whose flesh had been torn open and killed by frostbite. Marius, meanwhile, hurriedly lifted the cloak on his body and draped it over Ares. Hey, what are you doing, Marius? I can't see the snow anymore. Shut up, you idiot god. These snowflakes are deadly. Pass down my order. Have everyone take shelter immediately. Indoors, now. Marius shouted. However, by the time he noticed, it was already too late. And his order had come too late as well. Among the army of several thousand, the casualties had already reached triple digits. The sudden bitter cold and the blooming ice flowers were continuously stealing away those frail lives. Chapter 162, Chapter 162, I came to kidnap you. 1292 words rarely burned through the Ryatsu inside his body, freezing the moisture in the atmosphere, and taking control of the entire sky above the royal capital through Tenso Jurin. In just a few short minutes, the temperature within Rakia Kingdom's royal capital had plunged to -33 degrees. On top of that, Rayleigh used Tenso Jurin to create violent winds comparable to a level 7 gale. Heaven and earth turned into a world of endless white. The naked eye could no longer see anything more than a meter ahead. And mixed into the snowstorm was Hayatan Hayakaso, causing many people to have parts of their bodies frozen by blossoming ice flowers. After causing such a massive disturbance, Rayleigh was not exactly in good shape either. His Ryatsu was nearly exhausted. Of the cross-shaped ice flowers behind him, only 2 remained. His Bankai was about to be forcibly undone. However, the blizzard he had created through Hyarinra's power would continue for at least another 4 or 5 hours. Using the snowstorm to hide himself, Rayleigh soon reached the location of the secret passage. The moment Lillian saw him fly down and land, she rushed forward. "You finally came. What is going on with this weather? Did you do this?" The Beastman girl was completely shaken. She knew this man was strong. But this was way too ridiculous. He had actually changed the weather of an entire kingdom, making snow fall in this season. And this snow was not normal either. It was too cold. Normally, even hail would not make the temperature drop this quickly. At this very moment, every household in the city had lit their fireplaces to keep warm. Otherwise, people really would freeze to death. "Leave while we can." Rayleigh did not explain much as he immediately spoke. Lillian did not dare ask more. She led him to meet up with Lady Phobos and Welf Kratzo, who had arrived ahead of them. At that moment, both of them were wrapped in thick clothing. Even so, their ears and cheeks had been frozen red. "Rayleigh-kun, thank you for saving us." The goddess held Rayleigh's hand, lifting it and covering it between her palms. Rayleigh noticed that her hands were somewhat cold, so he infused the power of Kaido into her body. Feeling something warm enter her, Phobos immediately showed a look of pleasant surprise. Then Rayleigh reached his hand toward Lillian. At first, Lillian wanted to dodge. But after seeing Phobos's reaction, she held herself still. Rayleigh placed one hand on the Beastman girl's head and performed the same action, driving away the cold that had accumulated inside her body and allowing the power of Kaido to circulate through her, helping her resist the freezing weather. When it came to Welf, Rayleigh reached out, only for the boy to dodge. "Why are you dodging? Not a little kid." Rayleigh froze for a moment, then gave the slightly red-faced, red-haired boy a long, judging look. If this wasn't a little kid behavious, then what was? The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Then he extended his fist toward the boy instead. When Welf saw that Rayleigh had changed the gesture into a fist bump, he felt as though he had been acknowledged. He was so happy that both rows of his teeth showed in a wide grin. He's so easy to coax. Their fists touched. Rayleigh thought, a kid really is still a kid. "All right. You go first. I'll follow shortly." As though he had remembered something, Rayleigh said that to the 3 of them. Welf asked, "You're not coming with us?" Seeing the worry on his face, Rayleigh said, "Don't be fooled by how she looks. She's actually a professional. You don't need to worry if you follow her. I'll catch up soon." When Lillian heard Rayleigh praise her, she was so overwhelmed that she immediately saluted on the spot. "I'll complete the mission." Rayleigh showed her the back of his hand and tapped it. Lillian immediately understood. If anything unexpected happened, she was to contact him using that magic. She nodded heavily, then led Phobos and Welf into the secret passage. After seeing them off, Rayleigh returned to the palace once more. He arrived at Eleanora's room and found her sitting in front of the fireplace, wrapped in a thick blanket and shivering as she muttered at the flames. "Honestly, is this the end of the world? A blizzard this huge came out of nowhere. Has this country finally been punished by the gods? Ha ha ha, just kidding. Yoo, it's so cold. If Rakia could just be destroyed like this, that would be nice. Then I wouldn't have to become a breeding machine. The snow is so beautiful." The girl gazed at the snow outside the window, her thoughts a tangled mess. Her life recently had truly been one disaster after another. First, that curse-like skill had been discovered. Then Lady Batet had been punished because of it. After that, she was kidnapped, rescued, and even ended up beating a kingdom knight during the ceremony. She had thought this might be the beginning of a story. But now, it seemed her existence was nothing more than a passing character in someone else's chapter. In the end, she still could not escape her tragic fate. She wondered how later generations would record her, the mother of heroes. What is that guy doing now? Ulquiorra. That was obviously a fake name. That idiot. If you talk badly about someone behind their back, your tongue might rot off. The moment Eleonora heard Rayleigh's voice, she shot up like she had been launched. But the blanket around her was too long, and she tripped over it, falling straight forward in a full-body tumble. The sound alone made it clear how much that hurt. Why you? Eleonora stood up while holding her nose, tears in her eyes as she pointed at the boy in front of her. Rayleigh ignored her reaction and opened his palm toward the fireplace. By changing the arrangement and density of rasure, he increased the strength of the flames. The temperature inside the room immediately rose, becoming much warmer. After doing that, he spoke to the girl, fine. Ulquiorra was indeed a fake name. My real name is Rayleigh. The princess repeated the pronunciation softly, then gave a very haughty little huff. What a weird name. I get that a lot. Eleonora turned her face away, but one eye secretly glanced in Rayleigh's direction. Did you finish your business? More or less. Then why did you come here? Do I still have any use to you? The girl asked, her voice carrying a faint loneliness. But the moment the words left her mouth, her tone suddenly changed, becoming somewhat frightened. Don't tell me you're after my body. Rayleigh smiled and shook his head. Then, narrowing his eyes, he said, "Hm. Now that you mention it, I'm starting to think that does sound somewhat tempting." Wait, sorry, I was joking. I'm sorry. Eleonora apologized at the speed of light. She kept her apologetic posture for a while before slowly raising her head. A moment later, the princess's voice came out low and dejected. Did you come to say goodbye? Rayleigh looked at the girl's trembling body. The room was already warm now, yet she was still shaking. It was not because of the cold, but because she was afraid. Rayleigh raised one finger and wagged it left and right in denial. Don't be too surprised when you hear this. This time, I came to kidnap you. Eleonora. Read 30 chapters ahead and support me on patreon.com/NobiaTranslator. Chapter 163, Chapter 163, So this is what freedom looks like. 1299 words. What did you just say? Eleonora stared blankly at the boy in front of her. Rayleigh raised a hand and swept it through his hair. In an instant, the white strands turned black as ink. Then he closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, his pupils had returned to that abyss-like black. I'm from Rio. I came here this time after accepting a request from Lady Phobos, to bring her, and one of her children back with me. Eleonora, we haven't known each other for very long. It would be hypocritical to talk about trust, so I've decided to simply abduct you instead. 3 days. His connection with this girl had not lasted longer than that. But because of various circumstances, he had learned quite a lot about what she had gone through. Were they friends? Probably not. Did they have a favorable impression of each other? After all, both of them had good looks. When a handsome boy and a beautiful girl met, it was easy for attraction to start from appearances. But that was still far from enough to entrust one's life to the other. Rayleigh simply did not want to watch a pitiful princess become Ares's tool for mass-producing prodigies. To put it simply, he found it unpleasant, so he decided to interfere. Rio. Hephaestus. Are you an adventurer? Eleonora asked, a little surprised, though not exactly shocked. She had made guesses about Rayleigh's identity, she just not sure about it. After all, the idea of an adventurer from Rio sneaking into Rakia Kingdom alone was far too ridiculous. She had not thought real people could be as foolish and reckless as the heroes in stories and picture books. But reality seemed to have slapped her in the face. You said you're taking me to Rio. I can take you there. Then take me with you. As you wish. Rayleigh extended his hand toward the girl. Eleonora placed her hand in his, as though accepting an invitation to dance. As the royal palace grew smaller and smaller in her sight, the princess's emotions became complicated. She did not have many memories of her mother. All the memories she had of her mother's face were of that sorrowful expression. She had always thought that would be her own future. But now, she was soaring freely through the sky like a bird. The birdcage gradually vanished from view. And the dark clouds inside Eleonora's heart began to part. Rayleigh took Eleonora and flew straight out of the royal capital. He did not go through the secret passage. After leaving the city, the princess looked out over the vast land with shining eyes. In the past, the towering walls of the royal capital had been the end of everything she could see. The last time Rayleigh had carried her through the air, it had been night, so this was her first time seeing the horizon like this. So this was the world. So this was. Hey, stop moving around. I'm going to drop you. Rayleigh looked at the girl's excitement and felt somewhat moved. When he had first arrived in this world, he too had been filled with curiosity toward it. Setting out on an adventure had made his heart leap with joy. The excitement and thrill in his chest had been impossible to stop. Was this what people called returning to one's original spirit? For some reason, the many worries that had troubled him before, and the pressure that had built up in his heart, seemed to have vanished. Even breathing felt smoother. So this was what it meant to be blinded by being too close to the situation. He clearly knew the direction this world was headed in. He knew about many conspiracies and hidden truths in advance, yet in turn, those very secrets had suppressed his original self. The great feud, the nightmare of the 27th floor, the tragedy of justice, the creature, the corrupted spirit, the promised day, the city destroyer, the Xenos, the unexplored regions, the ancient monsters, the black dragon. The more he knew, the more he craved strength. He had not even realized that his own mindset had begun to slip into impatience. Suddenly, he somewhat understood why Hephaestus had looked at him with such worry before. So his patron goddess had already seen that far ahead. As expected of my goddess. Rayleigh took Eleonora to rest in a small town. He still could not fully relax. Because their opponent was Rakia Kingdom. Of course, that was not solely because of its strength. It was because of Ares. The blizzard he had stirred up was a natural disaster for the royal capital. If this had been an ordinary country, they would now be trying every possible method to calm the people and organize rescue efforts. But Rakia Kingdom was different. Because Ares was a war maniac, and also an idiot whose brain was made entirely of muscle. Would he choose to show concern for the people, comfort the citizens, and organize disaster relief? Rayleigh could say with certainty that the god would never care about any of that. After reorganizing his forces, Ares would immediately launch a pursuit, all for the sake of reclaiming his important strategic resources. Princess Aisha, and Welf Kratzo of the Kratzo family. These two hopes for Rakia Kingdom, and for the rise of Ares Familia, had been taken away at the same time. There was no way Ares would give up on them. Bakudo number 58, Kakushitsuijaku. Because they had exceeded the range at which he could sense Ryuraku, Rayleigh relied on the Ryatsu he had recorded from Lulyun, and used tracking Kido to locate her. Numbers flashed across the circular mirror-like surface before Rayleigh pieced them together, and obtained a set of coordinates. After correcting his route according to those coordinates, Rayleigh took Eleonora and set off again. Roughly 7 hours later, Rayleigh finally caught up with Lulyun, Phobos, and Welf. You finally caught up. The Beastman girl looked visibly relieved. Only the gods knew how nervous she had been, having to escort two people who needed protection while also staying alert for pursuers and bandits. Lulyun now fully understood how important it was to have a powerful ally to rely on. With a companion as strong and monstrous as Rayleigh around, most problems no longer needed to be worried about. After her initial excitement, her attention quickly shifted to the princess behind Rayleigh. And she is? Before Rayleigh could explain in response to Lullian's question, Phobos had already spoken first. Why are you here? Phobos looked at Eleonora in astonishment. The princess answered, Lady Phobos, my name is Eleonora now. Aisha is the name of Rakia's princess. It doesn't belong to me, and I don't want to accept it. As one of Ares's subordinate gods, Phobos knew what had happened to Eleonora. In a sense, Wealth and this princess were in the same situation. Your Highness. Wealth dropped to his knees. After all, he was a noble. Although he was not especially skilled in etiquette, he had received the education expected of him. Since childhood, he had been taught how to behave before royalty. Eleonora crouched down and helped him up. Are you a citizen of the kingdom? I've already thrown away my former identity. Right now, I'm only Eleonora, so you don't need to treat me with such respect. Aside from the blood I happen to be born with, I have nothing worthy of that kind of reverence from you. Wealth froze. He stared blankly at the princess before him. She had clearly lost everything and become someone with nothing at all. Yet for some reason, Wealth felt that Her Highness the Princess looked very happy. Chapter 164, Chapter 164, She was doing it on purpose, isn't she? 1178 words, what do we do next? Eleonora asked with a trace of excitement. Rayleigh glanced at her, feeling somewhat helpless at the state she was in, then answered. First, we need to get new transportation. We aren't that far from Orario, but it's not close enough for women and children to walk there on foot. His words made all four of them nod. 2 seconds later, however, Wealth suddenly protested in dissatisfaction, I'm not a kid. I didn't say you were, Rayleigh replied casually. Then that's fine. And Wealth actually believed him. Phobos looked at the boy being fooled with a gentle, motherly expression. Inwardly, she thought it was fortunate that they had escaped. Otherwise, in noble circles, it would have been strange if this child wasn't tricked like an idiot. If all we had to do was walk, our legs wouldn't exactly fall off. The problem is that we'd be caught before reaching our destination. As he spoke, Rayleigh's tone grew a little more urgent. He took a deep breath, steadied his breathing rhythm, then frowned slightly. Something's wrong. What do you mean? Phobos asked. My mind is recovering abnormally slowly. Isn't that completely normal? Lullian looked speechless as she gestured with both hands. You changed the weather of an entire city, and fought who knows how many times in a row. In her eyes, that was not something a level 3 should be able to do at all. Even if the strongest level 3 mage in the city came here, and saw what Rayleigh had done, they would probably wonder whether they were still dreaming. Something like that was probably only possible for 9 Hell in Orario. Rayleigh rejected her explanation. My recovery speed is usually much faster than this. And I have spirit healing as a development ability. This situation isn't reasonable. Hey, seriously. Don't tell me you were poisoned. Rayleigh paused. Suddenly, he remembered when Marius had shown that magic item on him. It probably was not poison. Otherwise, the power of Kaido would have cleared it away. Besides, as far as he knew, there were very few poisons capable of affecting a Shinigami's spiritual body. Rather than poison, this was probably some kind of debuff. No, this was not a game. How could there be such a thing as a debuff? Was it a curse? Rayleigh felt a chill in his heart. In this world, curses were an extremely special form of spellcraft, and there were very few methods to remove them. If it had come from the great magical nation of Altina, then even a curse would not be strange. The fact that Rakia had obtained something like that was probably thanks to Altina's internal conflict. The structure of the world was changing every moment. But Orario, standing at the far end of the continent, remained detached from all of it and barely felt those changes. Don't worry, Rayleigh said, calming the others. Other than my mind recovery slowing down, there don't seem to be any other issues with me. At least, not right now. With that, he began moving with the four of them. Lilian walked beside him while holding the map. There's a market about 14 kilometers from here. We should be able to get a carriage there. Then we'll head there first. Rayleigh made the decision. The group immediately set out without stopping. Among them, Eleonora and Welf had both received fauna. As for Rayleigh and Lilian, that went without saying, both were upper-class adventurers with titles. The result was that Phobos became the one slowing them down. After sealing her divine power, all she had left was her breathtaking beauty. Her stamina was no different from that of a delicate woman. At this rate, we'll be too inefficient. Lilian, you carry her, Rayleigh said. The moment Lilian heard that she had to carry a goddess, her face filled with panic. Her gaze drifted to the side, not daring to look directly at Rayleigh. She pressed the tips of her index fingers together in front of her chest and muttered, well, I am not very strong. And I'm too short. At first, Rayleigh thought she was making excuses. But when she mentioned the height problem, he realized that it was indeed true. Looks like I'll have to trouble you then, Lord Adventurer. So he walked over to Phobos. Please don't tease me. Rayleigh crouched down with his back to the goddess. Phobos wrapped her arms around his head, crossing her hands in front of his chest. Rayleigh only felt a heavy softness press against his back. Then, by instinct, he lifted both hands and supported her thighs to keep her from falling. Two different kinds of softness attacked his brain at the same time. This was seriously difficult to stay calm through. After a brief pause, Rayleigh began moving with Phobos on his back. And once he took several steps, he realized he had been thinking far too simply. The real stimulation had only just begun. This goddess was doing it on purpose, wasn't she? And she kept making strange sounds. After realizing she was teasing him, Rayleigh hardened his heart and said, pick up the pace. Then he took the lead and started running. Even if the goddess nearly got thrown off, he kept a firm grip on her thighs. After traveling like that for more than 3 hours, the group arrived at the market. There were not many people here. The moment Phobos's figure appeared, she immediately drew the attention of everyone in the market. That person is a god. It's a goddess. Seeing these people's reactions made Rayleigh remember when he had first arrived in this world. He knew that people in this world were aware that the gods had descended to the lower world, but not that many had actually seen a god with their own eyes. And yet, even if they had never seen a real god before, the instant they saw Phobos, they understood what she was. That was the special aura of a god. Many people dropped to their knees to welcome Phobos's arrival, and a few only bowed in greeting. Lilian found a merchant and tried to arrange a carriage back to Orario. Rayleigh and the others waited nearby. Since they were hungry, they began eating food from the market. Of course, none of it tasted particularly good. Dry cheese, hummus and flavorless bread, all wrapped in some kind of nameless herb leaf before being eaten. Rayleigh casually took 2 bites. Seeing the difficult expressions on their faces, the merchant explained. Storage conditions are limited. These are the only things we can bring with us. For safety reasons, we usually avoid hunting in the wild. We'd like to eat meat too. Though this place was called a market, in reality, it was only a caravan formed by traveling merchants briefly stopping here. There were around 15 carriages in total. Each of them was doing a different kind of business. Chapter 165, Chapter 165, Crack 1158 words. A short while later, Lilian came back with her report. Not good. The merchant over there isn't willing to sell the carriage. If we just travel with the caravan and follow the goods, we'll definitely get caught. The moment they heard they might be caught, both Eleonora and Welf grew tense. Hey, can't you just fly us there? Eleonora asked Rayleigh. From her personal experience, Rayleigh's flying speed was extremely fast. At the very least, it was far faster than a horse. Rayleigh looked at her and said helplessly, "I'd collapse from exhaustion before we reached Rio. If that happens, we'll really have no options left." Although Daegyur Hyarinmur could provide the ability to fly, that power was not meant for carrying passengers. The efficiency was far too low. At this moment, Rayleigh truly wished he could forge Minazuki. As a living-type Zanpakuto, once Minazuki was released, it would transform from a blade into a huge creature similar to a manta ray. Minazuki's body was enormous. It could carry multiple people through the air, and its speed was very high. Because he would only need to maintain its Shirkai release, the Ryatsu consumption would be minimal. Carrying 4 people across several hundred kilometers would not be much of a problem. Unfortunately, he could not just create a Minazuki bare-handed. "I'll negotiate." After leaving those words behind, Rayleigh went to find the merchant Lulyan had spoken to earlier. 5 minutes later, he returned to the 4 of them and said, "Done. We're leaving now." Lulyan froze. She glanced at the middle-aged merchant not far away, then could not help but questioning Rayleigh's method. "Don't tell me you threatened him." "Rayleigh? How could I possibly do something like that?" "Then why did that man suddenly agree?" "That is the charm of money." Rayleigh pinched 2 fingers together as he spoke a shallow yet very real truth. Lulyan's mouth fell open. "How much did you promise to pay him?" 10 million valis. Takeoff, cough. 10 million. Lulyan rushed forward, lifted Rayleigh's coat, and roughly shoved her head inside while saying, "You're carrying that much money on you?" Rayleigh pushed her away. "Of course not. It's not like I have some kind of spatial ring." "Then why would he believe you'll pay him?" When asked that, Rayleigh scratched his cheek and said, "About that. I didn't expect myself to be this famous." The moment he saw me, he asked whether I was Rayleigh from Hephaestus Familia, then directly called out my title. After I admitted it, he agreed. Rayleigh himself looked a little surprised. Out of those 5 minutes, most of the time had been spent listening to the man flatter him. In that instant, Lulyan understood. That made sense. Among these merchants, there were naturally some who traveled to and from Rio. That middle-aged man was one of them. Otherwise, he would not be heading toward Rio. Since that was the case, of course he knew some information from inside the city. As the largest production-type familia, Hephaestus Familia was famous even outside Rio. And when speaking of the hottest rising star in Hephaestus Familia right now, there was no doubt it was Yodasai. Whether it was a fearsome reputation or a good one, that title had spread widely throughout Rio. Every Zanpakuto forged by Yodasai was worth hundreds of millions of valis. That was no longer some secret. Besides, this guy really was easy to recognize. White hair, black eyes, a handsome young face, the style of his clothing, and the fact that he was always carrying several swords. In a merchant's eyes, those were not swords at all. They were priceless treasures worth well over 1 billion valis in total. Although the merchant very much wanted to see the legendary swords said to possess souls, as an experienced traveling merchant, he knew he could not casually touch an adventurer's weapon. That was a major taboo. If one encountered an adventurer with a bad temper, even making such a request could get someone killed on the spot. Not to mention, this man was the one said to have killed over 1,000 people during the Great Feud. It was not as though the caravan had no guards. But none of them believed those guards could defeat an adventurer from Hephaestus Familia. After giving the merchant a token, Rayleigh grabbed Wealth and made him the driver, while he himself rested inside the carriage. Because they had walked for several hours without any rest, the women, including Lulyan, were utterly exhausted and soon fell asleep inside the carriage. Wealth was truly a child after all. He possessed a mysterious abundance of energy. The carriage did not move particularly quickly, only somewhat faster than everyone walking together. Because of his fatigue, Rayleigh truly fell asleep this time. He sank into a deep sleep, and his consciousness entered the depths of his inner world. Inside an apartment that was clearly modern in style, Rayleigh sat up from the bed. He looked around at the scenery, then naturally put on slippers and walked to the bathroom, where he looked at himself in the mirror. There were several faint streaks of red in his eyes. Rayleigh lowered his head, rinsed his mouth, and spat out the water. When he lifted his head again, a figure had appeared behind him in the mirror. Have you noticed something, Hyarinmaru? Rayleigh, your condition is not good. Can you figure out why? Rayleigh asked calmly. Hyarinmaru nodded, then looked toward the apartment window. Rayleigh walked to the balcony and looked outside. There he saw a crack. He understood it now, that crack was the culprit behind the fatigue he felt. Can it be removed? Rayleigh asked. By then, 3 more figures had already appeared behind him. Senbin Zakura, Ruriiro Kajaku, Hyarinmaru. The 4 manifested Zanpakuto spirits stood behind Rayleigh, all staring gravely at the fissure in his inner world. Seeing none of them answer, Rayleigh understood that this problem could not be solved for the time being. At the same time, Ares, who had departed from Rakia Kingdom, was leading 20,000 troops in a full-speed pursuit of Rayleigh and the others. Ares sat inside a luxurious carriage. Beside him was Marius, who was reviewing documents. Even while chasing an enemy, this king was still working. This was no longer simple workaholism. Marius had already grown used to things like this. After all, his god was an idiot who knew absolutely nothing about managing state affairs. Hey, Marius. Stop working and keep me company for a while. I'm busy. Marius was so busy he did not even have time to lift his head. However, his gaze occasionally drifted toward the tip of his own finger. After being healed, the injury could no longer be seen. Zanpakuto, was it? Perhaps, compared to Kratso magic swords, those were the objects that deserved far more attention. Chapter 166, Chapter 166. War 1220 words. Do you know what kind of enemy we're facing this time? During the march, one soldier spoke with a frightened look on his face. Several soldiers nearby heard him and answered carelessly, yeah, don't we? We're just chasing down some defectors. What did you say? Say that again. The soldier who had been insulted was about to lose his temper, when a nearby veteran suddenly turned back and said, he's right. You really are an idiot. Do you think they'd send out an army this large just to capture 2 people? The soldier from before gripped his spear with trembling hands. In a low voice, he said, I heard the enemy is a terrifying monster. That sudden blizzard in the royal capital. Apparently, that monster caused it. Is that true? A monster that could summon wind and rain, dropping Rakia's temperature by dozens of degrees in an instant and nearly freezing countless people to death. I'm not sure either, but they say an ice dragon did it. A dragon. An ice dragon. Some people said they saw the shadow of an enormous dragon in the clouds. They even heard its roar. The moment they heard their opponent might be a legendary monster, a dragon, every soldier present began to think about retreating. Because that was a dragon. A powerful existence that only appeared in myths and ancient legends. It was said that in the primordial era, several countries had been destroyed by mighty evil dragons. Once that rumor appeared, it spread through the army in an instant. After all, something like creating a blizzard that covered an entire royal capital was probably something only a legendary dragon could accomplish. But if they were really being sent to slay a dragon, could they actually win? Impossible. Even with 20,000 men, how were they supposed to defeat an ice dragon capable of freezing the land? For small soldiers like them, weren't they just cannon fodder? Stop talking nonsense. What dragon? If something like that really existed, how could we not have seen anything? I heard the general mention words like Orario, an adventurer. The enemy is probably a high-level adventurer from the Labyrinth City. An adventurer? The soldiers looked at one another. Yet their faces were full of disbelief. Compared to believing that one adventurer could possess the power to change the weather, they would rather believe all of this had been done by a legendary ice dragon. And even if the enemy really was an adventurer, could people like them win? Their opponent was a monster who had covered the entire royal capital in a blizzard. Are we going there to die? No one knew who had muttered those words, but panic immediately began spreading through the army. The high-intensity march, combined with confusion and despair, wore them down further. Some of the soldiers had not only caught colds, but also carried frostbite on their bodies. Rumble, rumble. The tremors in the ground startled Rayleigh awake, causing him to open his eyes. He looked toward the rear of the carriage. His gaze seemed to pierce through several kilometers of distance, as he sensed the approach of Rakia Kingdom's army. They're a little slower than expected. Rayleigh glanced at the others, who had yet to wake up, then suddenly met Lillian's bright eyes. You were awake. When the Beastman girl heard the question, she smiled faintly and said, Don't make me repeat myself. I'm a professional. Rayleigh did not deny it after hearing that. He stood up and the Beastman girl hurriedly asked, Are you planning to face them head-on? Rayleigh shook his head. Of course not. Don't worry. The next time we meet, it'll be in Rio. With that, Rayleigh leapt down from the carriage. Watching the carriage gradually move farther away, Rayleigh removed his swords, held them in his arms, and sat cross-legged, waiting for the army led by Ares. Roughly 7 minutes later, the vast army appeared within Rayleigh's sight. Seeing the army approach, Rayleigh stood up and waved his hand. All 4 of his Zanpakuto stood upright on the ground. He slowly drew Senbenzakura, holding it upside down in front of him. Senbenzakura Kagyoshi. Countless blades transformed into hundreds of millions of cherry blossom-like petals, forming a massive wave that surged toward Rakia Kingdom's army. It's the enemy's attack. Its range is enormous. Fire the magic. Catapults, forward. All kinds of sounds mixed together. Countless attacks landed against the tsunami of cherry blossoms, but only weakened it slightly. When the sea of petals covered the crowd, hell descended. Everyone caught within the sea of flowers looked as though they had been thrown into a meat grinder, their bodies carved beyond recognition. Blood sprayed everywhere. The battlefield was instantly filled with the stench of blood. What's happening? These flowers. They're like sharp blades. It hurts. My foot was cut off. Help me, don't step on me. Marius's expression changed. Ares immediately shoved him aside and stared at the spectacular scene before him. Ohu! Now this is a rare sight. These petal-like things are actually sharp blades. To think he can control them in battle. That guy doesn't only possess ice powers. Although his own side was suffering terrible losses, in Ares's eyes, this was simply part of war. Of course, war required bloodshed and sacrifice. Could a war without casualties even be called war? The boy's voice rang in everyone's ears. In the next instant, the tsunami-like sea of flowers suddenly seemed to receive a command. It gathered together as one, rapidly forming an enormous sphere that spun at terrifying speed. Rayleigh raised 2 of his fingers together. The gigantic sphere began moving through the formation of Rakia Kingdom's army. Once that enormous meat grinder began advancing, horrifying screams rose one after another. It's coming. It's coming this way. Before the eyes of one young soldier, the veteran who had always guided and taught him was grazed by the spinning cherry blossoms. In the blink of an eye, the moon was dragged into Gokii. There was no scream or cry for help to be heard. In just an instant, 3 living people were turned into a mist of blood. Even their bones were crushed until nothing remained. The young soldier stood there in a daze. He no longer had the strength to run. Perhaps he was lucky. The enormous Gokii rolled past in front of him, and did not come toward him. Perhaps saying this was not quite right. But he truly felt relieved. Although he felt somewhat sorry for those who had died so horribly, he genuinely felt the gratitude of having survived a disaster. Then he began to run. Fuck this war. He was going to flee. However, he had only taken a few steps when an arrow pierced through his head and lodged in his skull. The young soldier fell stiffly to the ground. No running away. There is only one end for deserters. Kill them without mercy. Raise your shields. Break through. The enemy is only one man. Kill him, and this thing will stop. Anyone who doesn't want to die, charge with me. Read 30 chapters ahead and support me on Patreon. com/Nobaya Translator Chapter 167, Chapter 167, Freezing Hell 1208 words facing a charge of 20,000 men, even the countless blades of Senbenzakura Kageyoshi could not stop them completely. Rayleigh was very conscious of his Ryatsu consumption, so aside from using Gokyai to cut down the enemy's numbers in one sweep, he had been controlling Senbenzakura conservatively the whole time. Countless blades returned to his side, reforming into an ordinary sword. After releasing Senbenzakura Kageyoshi, Rayleigh drew Ruriiro Kujaku from beside him. Bloom in frenzy, Ruriiro Kujaku. Shining vines surged toward the enemy. Using the strength of their spiritual pressure as a filter, Rayleigh selected those with larger amounts of mind and wrapped the vines around them, sucking the power from their bodies. Watching their comrades go from living, breathing men to shriveled bags of skin and bone chilled the soldiers to their cores. Many times, soldiers on the battlefield were not afraid of death itself. What they feared was an end worse than death. They could tell that even after being reduced to such a state, those men were still alive. And that kind of life was worse than simply dying. Too slow. A trace of dissatisfaction appeared on Rayleigh's face. These people had too little spiritual power since Ruriiro Kujaku's buds had not filled enough. Naturally, they could not bloom. Even if he drained all the life force from these people, the amount of spiritual power he gained would still be little more than a drop in the bucket. So he controlled Ruriiro Kujaku and continued searching for targets with reckless intensity, draining more spiritual power. But by now, the enemy had also reacted. Gathering their courage, they raised their weapons and began hacking at Ruriiro Kujaku's vines. Yet when their blades struck, they were only deflected. The soldiers were left at a loss. We can't cut them. Stabbing doesn't work either. Damn it, what the hell are these glowing vine things? Seeing this, one of the commanders also swung his weapon down at them. The result was no different. After his weapon trembled violently, it was knocked aside all the same. The toughness of these vines was astonishing. Only after draining 40 people of all their spiritual power did one of Ruriiro Kujaku's buds finally bloom. Rayleigh had no time to be elegant, he opened his mouth and chewed it directly. The Ryatsu inside his body rapidly recovered. So that curse only slows down my natural recovery. External mind can still be absorbed. Rayleigh withdrew Ruriiro Kujaku and drew Hyarinmaru. Sit upon the frozen heavens, Hyarinmaru. First came Shirkai. After Rayleigh released his Zanpakuto, 2 swings of his blade sent 2 ice dragons tearing through the air. The enormous ice dragons rampaged through the army before finally exploding into waves of cold air. Seeing large numbers of soldiers collapse and lose the ability to fight, Marius grabbed Ares and shouted. You idiot! I told you we needed to prepare countermeasures against the cold. But no, you just had to rush out immediately. Ares broke into a cold sweat, but he still stubbornly argued back. He shoved Marius aside and shouted, Eek! Cold is a minor problem. You can overcome it with burning passion and willpower. No one can overcome it like that, you stupid god. Marius was speechless. After feeling the speed of his Ryatsu consumption, Rayleigh decisively used Bankai. Daiguren Hyarinmaru. If possible, he wanted to directly use Shirkai Hyoketsu. However, Hyarinmaru had told him that his current self still could not control that kind of technique. So he could only settle for the next best option. 0-degree release. This was a new technique Rayleigh and Hyarinmaru had developed after learning that he could not yet use Shirkai Hyoketsu. Instead of condensing the moisture in the atmosphere into ice blocks, it went deeper, freezing water molecules into tiny grains of ice dust. Cold air at -70 degrees rushed toward the kingdom army, using the atmosphere itself as its medium. 0-degree release was a technique that prevented the cold air from freezing the moisture in the atmosphere, and it was also a more refined use of tensojuran. For Zanpakuto standing at the peak of fire and ice, both of which were tied to temperature, influencing the environment was an extremely simple matter. And for the environment, or rather, nature itself, to kill humans was far easier still. As everyone knew, water froze at 0 degrees Celsius under standard conditions. In other words, when the temperature dropped below zero, water would begin to freeze and eventually solidify completely. But Hyarinmura had changed that phenomenon, controlling the freezing point and pushing it far below zero. The cold air rarely released now, upon touching the human body, could lower a person's body temperature from 36.7 degrees Celsius to hypothermic levels within 1 minute. To achieve this result, Rayleigh deliberately preserved the humidity, lowered the temperature, and intensified the dry, freezing wind. In that terrifyingly cold environment, the soldiers of the kingdom army could not even open their eyes. The surface of their skin felt as though it were being sliced apart inch by inch. Every breath felt like swallowing 1,000 needles. The pain was unbearable, and soldiers began collapsing one after another. In the eyes of those falling into shock, at the far end of this frozen hell stood a cold-faced boy. We were wrong. To dare challenge such a man dying for that was not even worth pitying. Because what they had done was foolish beyond measure. As more and more soldiers collapsed from hypothermia, Ares saw his own men falling in waves at the front of the battlefield, unable to approach that figure at all. He immediately roared, "Mage units! Attack together!" Once his command was delivered, large numbers of archers immediately removed the bows from their backs, knocked their arrows, and aimed at Rayleigh. Seeing a dense rain of arrows rise into the sky, Rayleigh lifted the hand holding Hyarinmuru. Sword pressure erupted from the blade, carrying freezing air with it. The dense arrow rain was blown apart, and the cold air covered the arrows in a layer of frost. Fire the magic! Multicolored magical light flared within the army. Seeing this, Rayleigh pointed his blade toward the mage unit. Before their chants could be completed, he released a directional wave of cold air. A freezing gale swept forward with ice crystals. In an instant, the long, overlapping chants suddenly broke off. The kingdom army's mages all clutched their throats. Some dropped to their knees, while others rolled across the ground, but every one of them wore the same expression. Their throats had been damaged by ice crystals, leaving them in unbearable pain, and unable to chant magic anymore. The tears they had just squeezed out froze in place, and the brutal cold made their movements increasingly stiff. The kingdom soldiers felt their limbs gradually slipping away from them. The cold on the surface of their bodies invaded deep into their bones, as though blocks of ice had formed inside their joints. Irregular heartbeat, clouded consciousness. Symptoms of hypothermia began to appear. Hato number 58, 10 ran. Rayleigh added fuel to the fire. A massive tornado mixed into the freezing gale, cutting down the enemy's body temperature even faster. Chapter 168, Chapter 168, Surprised Attack 1388 words at this moment, among everyone present, only Rayleigh, whose soul coexisted with Hyarinmuru's, was unaffected by the brutal cold. As far as the eye could see, a sea of men surged toward him, piling forward like a living mountain. Every one of them was in terrible condition. Yet even with their minds clouded, they still charged at him with weapons raised. Rayleigh held Hyarinmuru in one hand and Sakanade in the other. Quietly he activated Sakanade Shirkai, then he was swallowed by the crowd. He stood like a protruding rock in the middle of a flood. The human tide crashed against him, split apart, and immediately closed in again. With a single slash across the torso, whether it was 3 people or 4, several men were cut in half at the waist. But the crowd pressing against him did not change at all. Rayleigh's twin blades danced wildly. Sword slash flew from his Zanpakuto with every swing. Each slash killed at least several people, and wounded more than a dozen. The enemies who got close to him could not keep their limbs intact. Arms and legs flew everywhere, occasionally mixed with one or two severed heads. Even with Sakanade distorting the directions of every enemy around him, stray attacks that had gone off course still landed on him 2 or 3 times every second. One soldier gritted his teeth and struck with all his strength. His broad-bladed scimitar came down hard, landing directly on Rayleigh's chest. But whether it was the sound it made or the vibration that traveled back into his palm, none of it felt like he had cut into flesh. The soldier was already dizzy from hypothermia. This had been a blow made with every last bit of strength he had. Yet when he saw what had happened to Rayleigh, he froze. The broad-bladed scimitar that should have been able to split a bull in half had landed on Rayleigh's chest without injuring him in the slightest. It had only cut open his shirt. Where the blade had struck, forget a wound, there was not even the faintest mark. Was this really human skin? Even the scales of a legendary dragon could only be this tough, right? After struggling so hard to reach this point, all of it had been useless. Wasn't that just too damn unfair? Why am I flying? That looked like my body. Oh, so my head had been cut off. Rayleigh had no time to study the psychological changes of a man who died with a smile on his face. The enemy was not stupid either. When they realized their blades could not injure Rayleigh at all, they did fall into despair for a short while. But soon they pulled themselves back together. Or rather, they threw caution away completely. One large man abandoned his weapon. Using his comrades as human shields, he seized an opening and threw himself onto Rayleigh, wrapping both arms around one of his arms and locking it down with all his strength. Even with one arm restrained, Rayleigh could still swing the sword in his other hand. Sword slash swept out, and several more men died on the spot. But immediately after that, even more people hurled themselves at him. Because of Sakanade's effect, they were technically lunging in the wrong direction, yet in the press of bodies, they somehow stumbled into him by accident and piled on. Rayleigh exerted strength, trying to throw them off. But one enemy after another pressed down on him, and within just a few seconds, they had built into a mountain of flesh. Senbenzakura. Rayleigh released Sakanade, opened his palm, and with a clear ring, Senbenzakura flew over and landed in his hand. Scatter, Senbenzakura. The scattering cherry blossoms interwove into a net, forming an incredibly sharp barrier. Then Rayleigh temporarily stopped using 0-degree release. Everyone touching him was instantly frozen into blocks of ice. After that, he erupted with Ryatsu, shattering those ice statues and breaking free from the restraints. Under his control, Senbenzakura circled around him, leaving only Rayleigh himself standing inside the safe zone. The so-called safe zone was the area a wielder of Senbenzakura had to leave open while controlling the blades. No blades would pass through that area, so there was no need to worry about the sword's master being harmed by his own weapon. At this moment, standing within that safe zone, Rayleigh looked somewhat disheveled. His coat being torn apart was still fine. After all, it was only an ordinary coat, not a shahakusho, so it was perfectly normal for it to be ripped to pieces. There are too many of them. A faint sheen of sweat appeared on Rayleigh's forehead, and he wiped it away with a casual motion. Against such overwhelming numbers, this much was only natural. If he were level 6, things might be different. But with his current strength, truly fighting 20,000 men alone and every one of them soldiers with fauna was still unreasonable, no matter how one looked at it. For some reason, all the ones charging at him were ordinary level 1 soldiers. From Rayleigh's observation, there were very few who had even reached the upper ranks of level 1. Since they had deployed an army of this scale, surely they did not think this alone would be enough to capture him. Was the goal a battle of attrition? If so, that was probably Marius's strategy. It seemed he trusted that cursed magic item a great deal. So they planned to exhaust my Ryatsu with sheer numbers. Having figured that out, Rayleigh brought one faintly glowing petal between his fingers to his mouth. If that was their strategy, then they had better not expect him to run out of stamina until he could no longer swing his sword. because as long as he had Ruriiro Kajaku, his Ryatsu could continue to recover while theirs declined, giving him a steady flow of power. Well, that said, sorry. I'm not kind enough to go that far for you. Rayleigh's Ryatsu erupted. In the next second, he shot forward like a cannonball, charging straight toward the chariot where Ares and Marius were. The obstacles in front of him were blasted away by the explosive force of Shunko. Before he could be surrounded again, Rayleigh used Shuinpa and appeared in the air. Then, using Raishur to create footholds invisible to the naked eye, he swept through the sky toward Ares. A sound tore through the air. Rayleigh twisted his body in midair, calmly avoiding the thrown weapon. He even had time to glance at its full shape. This was a halberd. So there were people in Rakia who used such vicious weapons. It was over 2 meters long, roughly 4 centimeters in diameter, and had little flexibility. The tip was not only a double-edged blade serving as a spearhead, but was also attached to a sharp axe blade. It was a polearm capable of both thrusting and chopping. Judging from the sound of the wind, the weapon weighed around 100 kilograms. With that kind of weight, combined with its forward heavy balance, even without much strength behind it, simply being able to swing it was enough to make it dangerous. And someone capable of throwing such a thing like a ballista bolt had to be at least mid-tier level 3. Rayleigh swept his gaze across the battlefield, trying to find the person responsible. However, at that moment, his sense of danger suddenly intensified, warning him. A sound came tearing through the air from behind. Rayleigh instantly turned around. Bakudo number 39, Enkozen. With the incantation abandoned, the spell activated instantly. The violent impact slammed Rayleigh backward through the air. When he took a closer look at what had struck him, his eyes widened slightly. It was the same halberd he had just dodged. It came from behind. Was it a tracking attack, or had someone relayed it through the air? On a battlefield of 20,000 people, Rayleigh's perception and insight were both being heavily disrupted. He could not notice everything. A sharp sound rang out. A fracture appeared on Enkozen, spreading outward from the point of impact. Read 30 chapters ahead and support me on Patreon. com/Nobaya Translator. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.